Have you ever wondered what would happen if your grandpa turned himself into a pickle just to avoid family therapy? Rick and Morty has given us some of the most bizarre moments in animation history. Moments that somehow make perfect sense within the chaotic multiverse the show has created. Tonight, we're going to tuck you in with the strangest adventures Rick and Morty have experienced, from interdimensional cable featuring ants, In My Eyes Johnson to a theme park built inside a homeless man. These stories might be too weird for normal bedtime, but they're just right for fans looking to drift off to dreams of infinite realities. The soft glow of Morty's bedside lamp casts strange shadows across his bedroom walls, the familiar shapes of his furniture transformed into something almost alien in the dim light. It's an unusually peaceful night in the Smith household. No interdimensional portals pulsing with ethereal light, no screaming, no explosions, and most strikingly, no signs of impending doom. Just the quiet sound of Morty's ceiling fan turning lazily overhead as Rick sits perched on the edge of his grandson's bed, an uncharacteristically serene expression on his normally frantic face. Rick's hair is slightly less wild than usual as he adjusts Morty's blanket, his movements awkward yet somehow tender, as if the very act of tucking someone in is a long-forgotten skill he's struggling to recover. Morty watches his grandfather with equal parts suspicion and hope, his eyes wide with a childlike vulnerability we rarely get to see when they're narrowly escaping death across the multiverse. This moment of domesticity feels almost jarring against the backdrop of their typical reality-bending chaos. Hey Rick, Morty says, his voice cracking slightly as he nestles deeper into his pillow. I know this is going to sound weird, but would you maybe tell me a bedtime story? The question hangs in the air for a moment as Rick's eyebrow arches dramatically high. Morty quickly adds, I mean, you don't have to if you think it's stupid or whatever. Rick takes a long pull from his flask, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand before answering. A bedtime story? What are you, 6? Despite his sarcastic tone, there's no immediate rejection, no rushing toward the door. Instead, Rick pockets his flask and shifts his weight on the bed, seemingly considering the request with more seriousness than anyone might expect. Yeah, but maybe something about our normal days? Morty continues, his voice hopeful. Something that isn't gonna give me nightmares for a week? At this, Rick's face cracks into a cynical laugh that starts low in his chest before bubbling up into an almost maniacal cackle. Normal days? Normal days? His laughter grows more intense with each repetition. Oh, that's rich, Morty. That's really rich. He wipes an imaginary tear from his eye. Name one normal day we've had. Just one. Morty opens his mouth to respond, but Rick is already lost in thought, his eyes growing distant as he mentally flips through their countless adventures like someone scrolling through the universe's most disturbing photo album. Let's see, there was the time we almost got killed by a hive mind of sentient bacteria. No, too much pus for bedtime. His fingers tap rhythmically against his knee. The Gazorpa-Zorp uprising? Nah, too many consent issues. The Vindicators? Too much death? That time in Dimension C-137 with the intelligent toasters? Too many burns. With each rejected option, Rick's expression shifts subtly, the calm, grandfatherly facade beginning to crack around the edges, revealing glimpses of the manic genius underneath. His fingers drum faster against his knee, his breathing quickening almost imperceptibly. The Microverse battery incident? The Galactic Federation prison break? The wedding massacre? The snakes with time travel? The heist convention? The talking cat in Florida? Nope, nope, nope. All way too traumatizing for bedtime. Morty pulls his blanket up higher, clearly regretting his request as Rick's eyes dart back and forth, accessing memories that seem to physically affect him. The camera slowly begins to zoom in on Rick's face, highlighting the gradual transformation taking place. His previously relaxed features tightening, his pupils dilating slightly, the corner of his mouth twitching with barely contained energy. We've seen this look before. It's the face of a man who's about to do something either brilliant or catastrophic, possibly both. Although ... Rick's voice drops an octave, taking on that dangerous quality that usually precedes their most chaotic adventures. His eyes narrow to intense slits as the camera continues its slow push toward his increasingly manic expression. You want a bedtime story? Let me tell you about the time I turned myself into a pickle. As Rick utters those fateful words, something strange happens to the scene. The edges of the room begin to blur slightly, the colors shifting and distorting as if reality itself is responding to the memory. The bedside lamp's glow intensifies, casting Rick's shadow against the wall in elongated, distorted proportions. The transition into flashback begins subtly, first with the sound of Rick's voice becoming slightly echoey, then with flashes of green that pulse at the edges of the frame. It all started with family therapy, Rick continues, his voice now functioning as narration while the visuals begin to warp more dramatically. Your mom had scheduled this whole family counseling thing with Dr. Wong. Real waste of time. I mean, who needs to talk about their feelings when you can just repress them until you die, am I right? The bedroom scene stretches and contorts, folding in on itself like a piece of paper being crumpled by invisible hands. Morty's wide-eyed expression is the last thing we see before the colors shift completely, the blues and purples of his bedroom giving way to the harsh fluorescent lighting of the Smith family garage. We're no longer in the present moment. We've been transported back to what was perhaps the most bizarre transformation Rick has ever undergone. So there I was, Rick's narration continues over the flashback, lying on the garage floor as a pickle. A pickle, Morty. Not a cucumber, not a zucchini. A perfect briny pickle. The camera reveals Rick in his pickle form, alone on the cold concrete, the syringe that could restore him to human form tauntingly out of reach on the workbench above. As the flashback fully establishes itself, we understand the framing device for our journey. Rick isn't just telling Morty bedtime stories. He's recounting their most bizarre adventures as a way of normalizing the madness that is their daily life. These aren't cautionary tales or moral lessons. They're reminders that in the Smith family, the bizarre is the baseline. The absurd is their normal. The genius of this setup becomes clear. It allows us to revisit the show's most iconic moments through Rick's own narrative lens, to see these adventures not just as we experience them as viewers, but filtered through Rick's self-perception and Morty's reactions. It's a metatextual approach that lets us examine how the characters themselves process the insanity they regularly experience. As the Pickle Rick flashback unfolds in all its absurd glory, the audio occasionally cuts back to the bedroom where Morty interrupts with questions or comments, grounding us in the present while still allowing the past to play out in vivid detail. These interruptions serve as perfect punctuation marks, breaking up the flashback just when the madness threatens to become overwhelming. But wait, we hear Morty's voice cut through the flashback. Wasn't that whole pickle thing just to avoid going to therapy with us? That's reductive, Morty, Rick's present-day voice answers defensively. It was about scientific discovery and survival against impossible odds. The therapy avoidance was just a bonus. The flashback continues, showing Rick battling rats and constructing a body from their carcasses, a sequence somehow made even more disturbing by Rick's casual narration of his thought process during these events. What does it say about a person when they'd rather transform into a vegetable, battle an army of rats, and fight through armed guards than spend an hour talking about their feelings? Rick's extreme measures to avoid therapy weren't just about missing an appointment. They revealed the one thing in the multiverse that truly terrifies the smartest man alive: emotional vulnerability. The pickle transformation itself was just the beginning. As the Smith family walks out the door to their therapy session, we see genuine panic in Rick's beady pickle eyes. His desperate calls for help, which he'd never admit were desperate, echo through the empty garage. Rick's predicament becomes increasingly dire as a simple rain shower knocks him from the workbench onto the scorching concrete of the driveway, leaving him helpless under the blazing sun. I wasn't actually worried, Rick's present-day narration cuts in defensively. I'm Rick Sanchez. I could have gotten out of that situation with my eyes closed. I just needed to assess my options. The flashback continues as Pickle Rick rolls himself into the shade and begins his elaborate escape plan, starting with attracting a cockroach using his own bodily fluids. The methodical way he lures, kills, and then repurposes the insect's nervous system shows his scientific brilliance, but it also demonstrates his absolute determination to avoid joining his family for therapy. See, I attach the cockroach's limbs to my brine-soaked body using its own nervous system, Rick explains to Morty, his voice taking on that familiar tone of scientific pride that often masks his deeper motivations. I controlled its motor functions with the equivalent of a joystick made from its esophagus. The scene shifts to Rick navigating his makeshift cockroach-pickle hybrid body through the pipes of the house, eventually falling into a drainage system and landing in a basement full of rats. What follows is perhaps the most bizarre sequence of violence in the show. Rick using his scientific ingenuity to slaughter dozens of rats, harvesting their body parts to construct himself a more mobile form. The rat suit was actually my finest work. Rick's voiceover continues as we see him fastening tiny rat limbs to his pickle body. Functional musculature, skeletal structure reinforced with office supplies, all improvised on the spot. If you think about it, that's way more impressive than showing up to therapy on time. Morty's voice interrupts from the present. But that wasn't even the craziest part, was it? Tell them what happened next. The flashback expands to show Pickle Rick, now in his grotesque rat corpse exoskeleton, accidentally launching himself through a pipe and into a heavily fortified foreign government facility. Rather than trying to escape, Rick doubles down, fighting his way through waves of armed guards with increasing brutality and ingenuity. I think what's important to note here, Rick's narration continues as we watch him slaughter countless armed guards with improvised weapons and a rat body parkour, is the level of commitment I showed to scientific exploration. I mean, who else would have the dedication to see this experiment through? The violence of Rick's escape stands in stark contrast to the quiet, carpeted therapy room where Beth, Summer, and Morty sit with Dr. Wong. The juxtaposition becomes increasingly uncomfortable. Rick engaged in gratuitous bloodshed, while his family discusses their feelings and dysfunction. Let's be honest about what's happening. Dr. Wong's calm voice cuts through Rick's elaborate justifications in the flashback. The reason anyone would do this is, if they could, which they can't, would be because they could, which they can't. The camera zooms in on Pickle Rick's face as Dr. Wong continues her devastating assessment. Rick, the only connection between your unquestionable intelligence and the sickness destroying your family is that everyone in your family, you included, use intelligence to justify sickness. You seem to alternate between viewing your own mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. And I think it's because the only truly unapproachable concept for you is that it's your mind, within your control. For a brief moment, we see something genuinely rare in Rick's eyes: discomfort, perhaps even fear. Dr. Wong has identified the core of his problem, that for all his genius and multiversal adventures, the one frontier Rick refuses to explore is his own emotional landscape. You chose to come here. You chose to talk, to belittle my vocation, just as you chose to become a pickle. Dr. Wong continues as we see Rick's pickle face twitch slightly. You are the master of your universe, and yet you are still locked within it. The scene shifts back to the present, where Rick pauses in his storytelling, taking an uncharacteristically long sip from his flask. Anyway, he says dismissively, that shrink didn't know what she was talking about. I just thought being a pickle would be fun. Morty rolls his eyes. Yeah, and that's why you went through all that trouble just to avoid talking about your feelings for an hour. The flashback resumes as we see Rick finally making his way to the therapy office, arriving bloodied and exhausted in his makeshift rat body. The family's reaction to his appearance is surprisingly muted. They've become accustomed to Rick's extreme behavior. Dr. Wong, however, maintains her professional composure despite the absurdity of a pickle in a rat suit crashing through her window. I think the saddest part wasn't that you turned yourself into a pickle, present-day Morty interjects. It was that, after all that, you still couldn't admit why you did it. The flashback shows the therapy session continuing, with Rick reluctantly participating while maintaining his emotional distance. Despite his physical ordeal, he remains psychologically unavailable, deflecting any attempt at genuine connection or introspection. The funny thing is, Rick's present-day voice says quietly, I don't even remember what we talked about in that session. Probably just typical family dysfunction stuff. Nothing worth missing for. But the expression on flashback Rick's face tells a different story. There was something in that room more terrifying to him than all the rats and armed guards combined. The possibility of being understood, of being seen for who he truly is beneath all the scientific genius and multiversal adventures. The scene ends with the family leaving therapy together, Rick having re-injected himself with the anti-pickle serum and restored to human form. Physically, he's back to normal, but the emotional issues remain entirely unresolved. As they drive home in silence, we see Rick staring out the window, his expression unreadable but somehow heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. That silence in the car would become a familiar pattern for the Smith family. Moments of extreme trauma followed by an unspoken agreement to never discuss them again. But there's one catastrophe that even Rick can't fully brush aside, one that didn't just change their lives, but actually erased them completely. Back in Morty's bedroom, the boy shifts uncomfortably, interrupting Rick's reminiscing. "That wasn't even our worst day, Rick," Morty says, his voice carrying a weight beyond his years. "What about when we Cronenberged our entire world?" Rick's face darkens momentarily before he shrugs. "Oh yeah, that one. Not my finest moment of scientific innovation, I'll admit." His casual tone betrays no remorse as he continues. "It started with you wanting a love potion so Jessica would notice you during the school dance. A simple request from a hormone-addled teenager." The scene transitions to Rick's garage laboratory, where he's hastily mixing chemicals into a beaker of pink fluid. Morty stands anxiously nearby, repeatedly checking his watch. "All I needed was a simple combination of Vol DNA and oxytocin enhancers," Rick explains in voiceover. "The potion would make Jessica fall for you based on your existing genetic material, foolproof, except ... Except it was flu season," Morty interjects, his voice hollow. "Right," Rick continues. "The potion combined with the influenza virus, creating an airborne pathogen that spread exponentially. First Jessica, then the entire school dance. By morning, the entire town was infected. We see flashes of the initial chaos. People with glazed expressions chasing Morty through the streets, all of them mindlessly infatuated with him. Rick attempts a solution, creating a neutralizing agent from praying mantis DNA. The mantis DNA was supposed to counteract the love potion," Rick explains, his voice maintaining an unsettling scientific detachment. "But when it mixed with the flu virus and the original formula, it created something much worse. The screen fills with horrific images of people convulsing, their bodies twisting and morphing into grotesque insectoid monstrosities. Limbs elongate unnaturally, extra appendages burst through skin, and faces contort into unrecognizable masses of teeth and eyes. I called them Cronenbergs," Rick says, almost proudly. "Named after the body horror director David Cronenberg. Seemed fitting. The whole world, Rick," Morty's voice breaks through, anger finally piercing his otherwise flat delivery. "Everyone we knew became those things." The scene shows Rick and Morty in the garage, surrounded by the sounds of monsters outside. Rick frantically works on another solution, mixing more chemicals. "I tried to fix it, okay? I made an antidote from koala, rattlesnake, chimpanzee, cactus, shark, golden retriever, and just a smidge of dinosaur DNA. Which only made everything worse," Morty adds. "Yeah, turns out adding more DNA to an already unstable genetic cocktail isn't the best approach," Rick admits. By that point, every human on Earth except us had transformed into a Cronenberg monster. The flashback shows Rick and Morty, exhausted and defeated, sitting in the garage. Outside the windows, their world has become unrecognizable, a wasteland populated by shambling, screaming abominations that were once human beings. "And that's when you came up with your solution," Morty says bitterly. Rick shrugs. "It was elegant in its simplicity. We'd destroyed Earth C-137, our original dimension. But the beautiful thing about an infinite multiverse is there's always another reality where everything worked out fine." We see Rick operating a portal device, scanning through dimensions. "I found a reality where I successfully fixed the Cronenberg situation, but then we both died in an unrelated lab accident right afterward. Perfect timing. So we just left." Morty's voice is quiet now. "Abandoned everyone we knew." The scene shifts to Rick and Morty stepping through a portal into a garage identical to their own, except for one crucial difference. The lifeless bodies of their counterparts sprawled on the floor, victims of some apparent explosion. All we had to do was bury ourselves in the backyard and take their place, Rick says matter-of-factly. Nobody would know the difference. The camera lingers on Morty's face as he drags his own corpse across the lawn, his eyes hollow, his movements mechanical. Rick, meanwhile, seems entirely unbothered, whistling as he digs the shallow grave. That was the moment I realized how different we were, Morty narrates from the bedroom. You saw it as just swapping one reality for another. I saw it as the death of your entire world, Rick finishes, his voice finally showing a hint of understanding. But let's be real, Morty. We'd been changing realities since day one. You just hadn't noticed it before. The scene briefly flashes back to the Cronenberg world they left behind, where the monstrous versions of humanity continue to exist, shambling through the abandoned streets. Summer, Beth, and Jerry remain there too, having adapted to hunting Cronenbergs and surviving in the post-apocalyptic landscape. What gets me, Morty says, is how easily everyone adjusted. Mom, Dad, Summer, they never even questioned why we suddenly had our own graves in the backyard. The Smith family's capacity for denial is truly your superpower, Rick responds. You all just keep moving forward no matter how bizarre things get. We see a montage of the family going about their daily lives in the replacement dimension. Beth sipping wine, Jerry watching TV, Summer texting, all of them stepping carefully around the slight differences in this new reality, pretending not to notice. That episode fundamentally changed the show's universe, Rick explains, breaking the fourth wall slightly. Before then, consequence-free adventures were the norm in animation. After the Cronenberg incident, everything had potential continuity. Actions could have lasting repercussions. Is that why you never talk about it? Morty asks. Rick pauses, considering. Partly, but mostly because acknowledging it means admitting I made a mistake I couldn't fix. That I had to run away from a problem instead of solving it. The bedroom falls silent for a moment before Rick continues. The ability to abandon a ruined reality and start fresh in another one is both my greatest power and my greatest moral failing. It makes me wonder why I should ever care about consequences when I can just find a timeline where they don't exist. But they do exist, Rick, Morty insists. Just because we left doesn't mean that world disappeared. Those people are still suffering. True. And in infinite other realities, infinite other versions of us are having this same conversation, feeling varying degrees of guilt about it. Rick sighs. That's the real horror of the multiverse, Morty. Not that actions have consequences, but that consequences don't matter when reality itself is disposable. We see a brief montage of other Ricks and Mortys across different dimensions, some facing similar catastrophes, others living entirely different lives. The camera finally returns to our Rick and Morty in the bedroom. You know what's really messed up? Morty says. That wasn't even the last time we abandoned a reality. We've done it so many times since then I've lost count. Yeah, but the first time always hits different, Rick replies. Like your first heartbreak or your first genocide. You never forget the feeling. Rick's casual equation of heartbreak with genocide reveals his twisted moral compass. But there's another experience that warped Morty's perception in ways even dimension hopping couldn't match. At Blips and Chits Arcade, a simple video game called Roy didn't just entertain Morty, it completely replaced his existence. Within minutes, Morty experienced an entire lifetime as someone else, forgetting his own identity in the process. This wasn't just another adventure, it was an erasure of self more profound than any physical displacement across realities. Remember Blips and Chits, Morty? Remember Roy? Rick's expression darkens as we return to the bedroom. The memory clearly affects him differently than the Cronenberg incident, despite his attempt to maintain his usual detached demeanor. The scene shifts to the intergalactic arcade where Rick first introduced Morty to the game. The place buzzes with alien life forms of all shapes and sizes, each engaged with various gaming cabinets and virtual experiences, but none compared to the unassuming Roy, a life well-lived station tucked in the corner. Rick guides Morty to the machine, his enthusiasm at odds with the seemingly ordinary setup. Go ahead, Morty. Just put on the helmet, Rick encourages, the excitement in his voice betraying his knowledge of what's about to happen. Morty hesitantly places the neural interface over his head, and in an instant, his consciousness is transported away from the arcade floor. We see Morty's body go slack as his mind enters the simulation. But what comes next is far more disorienting than anything he's experienced before. One moment, Morty's a teenager at an arcade. The next, he's Roy Parsons, a baby being cradled by his mother. There's no transition, no tutorial. The simulation doesn't announce itself as a game. Instead, Morty's identity is immediately subsumed by Roy's developing consciousness. We watch as Roy grows from infant to toddler to school-age child, with not a single memory of Morty Smith remaining. The simulation accelerates through Roy's adolescence. First crush, high school football games, graduation. Each milestone feels authentically lived rather than observed. What makes the experience truly disturbing isn't just the completeness of the immersion, but how utterly Morty's true self vanishes. Unlike other adventures where Morty remains aware of his actual identity, inside Roy, he doesn't exist. Only Roy does. Roy attends college, meets a woman, falls in love. The simulation shows Roy's wedding day, the birth of his children, his career as a carpet salesman. We see Roy go through a cancer diagnosis, the terror of facing mortality, recovery, and the quiet gratitude of remission. Throughout it all, there's no hint of Morty, no awareness that this life is anything but reality. Rick's commentary plays over these scenes as we return occasionally to the arcade where Morty's body sits motionless at the controls. See that, Morty? You're making some really safe choices. You went back to the carpet store after beating cancer? Boring. His casual dismissal of Roy's, Morty's, life achievements reveals how differently Rick views these experiences. As Roy grows older, his hair graying and body weakening, we see him surrounded by grandchildren, reflecting on a life of mundane triumphs and ordinary sorrows. Then, at age 65, Roy dies peacefully in his sleep. The screen flashes, "Game over," and suddenly, violently, Morty is yanked back to reality. The return is brutal. Morty gasps, disoriented and panicked, as his consciousness is forced back into his teenage body. "Where am I? Where's my wife?" he cries out, still partially trapped in Roy's identity. Around him, alien arcade-goers hardly notice his existential crisis, some even laughing at what they perceive as an overly dramatic reaction to a simple game. "Relax, Morty. It's just a game," Rick says, but the casualness of his tone contrasts sharply with Morty's genuine distress. "That's the difference between you and me, Morty. I never go back to the carpet store." What makes this experience particularly unsettling is how it fragments Morty's sense of self. Unlike physical dimension hopping, where Morty retains his identity despite changing locations, Roy divides his consciousness through time rather than space. The game effectively introduces a secondary personality with decades of memories that never actually happened, yet feel completely authentic. Within the simulation, different aspects of Morty's personality were distributed among the characters, almost as if his consciousness was divided among every person except Roy himself. This fragmentation creates a unique form of identity crisis, not just wondering who you are, but having experienced being someone else so thoroughly that your original self feels like the illusion. In one particularly poignant moment after removing the helmet, Morty stares at his hands as if they belong to someone else. "I had a wife," he whispers. "I had kids. I had cancer." The weight of these experiences, all compressed into minutes of real time, leaves him struggling to reconcile which life is real and which is the simulation. Rick's response is telling, "Yeah, and now you're a teenager with your whole life ahead of you and no debt. Pretty sweet deal." His dismissal of Morty's experience reveals a fundamental difference in how the two characters process reality. To Rick, the simulation is just entertainment, experiences to be consumed without emotional attachment. To Morty, it was a life lived, with all the accompanying emotional connections. We see other arcade patrons casually stepping up to play Roy after Morty, treating these complete lived experiences as mere diversions. One alien puts on the helmet and immediately slips into a new identity, untroubled by the philosophical implications. This casual approach to consciousness transference highlights how uniquely human Morty's reaction is. his inability to simply compartmentalize the experience as just a game. Within the Roy simulation emerged a character named Marta, who represented a charismatic, capable, and defiant aspect of Morty's personality. This character highlighted leadership qualities within Morty that we rarely see in his adventures with Rick, perhaps because Rick's domineering presence never allows these traits to fully emerge. In the simulation, however, Marta could rally the population of Morty people, showing a potential for leadership that remains largely untapped in Morty's regular existence. What truly disturbs Morty isn't just having lived another life, it's that the simulation revealed parts of himself he never knew existed. The experience of being Roy showed him potential paths his life could take, choices he might make, and the person he might become without Rick's influence. The revelation that Rick considered certain aspects of Morty's personality expendable, traits that manifested as characters within the game, leaves Morty questioning how much of himself he's already lost through their adventures. The episode ends with a significant aspect of Morty's personality, Marta, trapped within the game, Rick explains, his voice unusually somber. That part of you, the defiant leader who could have stood up to me, got left behind in the system. For once, Rick seems to recognize the gravity of what happened, almost apologizing before catching himself and returning to his characteristic indifference. The game effectively served as both entertainment and a form of psychological surgery, removing elements of Morty's personality that might have challenged Rick's authority. Whether intentional or not, the experience left Morty more pliable, more willing to follow Rick's lead without question, a regression in his character development that would benefit their continued adventures. After surrendering parts of himself in Roy's simulation, you might think Morty would be more cautious about Rick's inventions. But what if the one thing you wanted most was the ability to undo your mistakes? Rick's save point device promised exactly that. But the reality behind this Emmy-winning episode reveals perhaps the darkest example of psychological warfare we've seen in animation. In the bedroom, Morty's face hardens as his eyes narrow. "What about the time you made me think I had a save point in real life?" he asks, his voice carrying the weight of unresolved trauma. Rick's expression shifts subtly as the scene transitions to a flashback. The entire ordeal began with something seemingly trivial, an argument about a vat of acid. Rick had proposed using a vat of fake acid as an escape plan, which Morty dismissed as stupid and ineffective. This minor disagreement spiraled into something far more sinister when Morty challenged Rick to create something truly impressive. "So Rick builds this little remote with a single green button on it," Rick narrates, his voice unusually soft. He tells Morty it's a save point device. Press it once to save your place in reality, press it twice to return to that exact moment if things go wrong. The scene shows Morty hesitantly taking the device, skepticism written across his face. His first test is harmless enough, knocking over a glass of water, then resetting to before it happened. The animation brilliantly captures the shift in Morty's expression from doubt to wonder as the device appears to work flawlessly. "What the kid doesn't realize," Rick continues, "is that this isn't time travel at all. It's something much worse." As Morty grows confident in the device's abilities, his behavior becomes increasingly reckless. We see a montage of him engaging in progressively more dangerous and unethical actions, shoplifting, starting fights, jumping from dangerous heights, all with the casual press of a button to erase any consequences. The animation style during this sequence perfectly captures the liberation Morty feels, his movements becoming more fluid and carefree as all sense of accountability vanishes. "This isn't just about Morty being a delinquent," Rick explains. "The real story begins when the plane crashes." During one reset, Morty finds himself on a plane that crashes in the mountains. Among the survivors, he meets a young woman, and in the aftermath of disaster, they fall deeply in love. The animation shifts here. Colors become warmer, the pace slows, and for the first time, we see Morty truly happy. They build a life together, complete with meaningful connections and genuine purpose. For months, Morty doesn't press that button, Rick says. He's found something real, something worth keeping. Eventually, they're rescued and returned to civilization. Morty introduces her to his family, moves in with her, and experiences a profound happiness he's never known before. The animation here is deliberate and patient, allowing viewers to invest in this relationship just as Morty does. We see shared meals, quiet moments, and the construction of a life that appears whole and meaningful. Then comes the twist that earned the episode its Emmy. When Morty accidentally spills wine on his girlfriend's parents at dinner, he instinctively reaches for the reset button. In that moment of panic, he sacrifices everything they built together for a trivial social embarrassment. And that's when Rick chooses to reveal the truth, Rick says, his voice taking on an edge of cruelty. There was never any time travel, just transportation between alternate realities. The horror dawns slowly on Morty's face as Rick explains the device wasn't returning him to earlier points in his timeline. It was abandoning each reality where Morty made a mistake and jumping to identical alternate realities where the mistake hadn't yet happened. Every time Morty pressed that button, he was leaving behind a version of himself to deal with the consequences while his consciousness moved to a fresh reality. Hundreds of abandoned Mortys, Rick says flatly. Some arrested, some injured, some dead, all because the kid couldn't face consequences. The animation becomes truly disturbing as Rick forces Morty to confront what he's done. Using another device, they visit each abandoned reality, where Morty must merge with his alternate selves, effectively killing them, to clean up the mess he made. The visual of Morty absorbing each version of himself, inheriting fragments of their memories and trauma, is brilliantly rendered with distorted animation and unsettling sound design. But the worst part, Rick continues, is when they go back to the reality where Morty found love. We see Morty standing outside the apartment he shared with his girlfriend, watching her through the window as she waits for a version of him that will never return. The animation here is stripped back and raw. No musical score, minimal movement, just the crushing weight of loss. "I can't," Morty whispers. "You have to," Rick responds coldly. "She's waiting for a Morty that doesn't exist anymore because you abandoned him. You abandoned her." Morty is forced to merge with this final alternate self, erasing the only reality where he found genuine happiness. The scene is presented without dialogue, allowing the devastating emotional weight to land without commentary. And that's when we learn this whole thing. This entire elaborate scheme was just because Morty made fun of Rick's vat of acid idea, Rick explains, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Every moment of suffering, every abandoned reality, every lost connection, all to prove a point. The resolution of the episode shows Morty standing in the vat of acid as criminals approach, forced to use Rick's initially ridiculed plan as his only escape. The humiliation is complete as Morty emerges from the acid, stripped not just of his clothes, but of his dignity and autonomy. The whole episode is psychological warfare, Rick concludes. Rick breaking Morty's spirit not because Morty did something unforgivable, but because he challenged Rick's authority. What makes the Vat of Acid episode particularly disturbing isn't just the cruelty of Rick's deception, but how it weaponizes Morty's most human desire, the wish to undo mistakes and find meaningful connection. Rick exploits this vulnerability with surgical precision, crafting a punishment that attacks Morty's emotional core rather than just his physical safety. The episode stands as perhaps the clearest example of the show's exploration of power dynamics and emotional manipulation. Unlike physical dangers that Morty regularly faces, this psychological manipulation leaves deeper scars, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions in the most painful way possible, while simultaneously showing him that his happiness is always secondary to Rick's ego. The psychological manipulation Rick inflicted on Morty seems almost merciful compared to the existential horror he engineered for another group of creatures. Have you ever considered what it means to create a being whose entire purpose is to complete one task and cease existing, then force it to live beyond its intended lifespan? That's exactly what happens with the Meeseeks box, a deceptively simple device that summons cheerful blue humanoids programmed with a singular directive: help someone with a task, then disappear. Back in the bedroom, Rick can't help but chuckle as he recalls another family misadventure. Remember when your mom got those Meeseeks to help with simple tasks? The memory seems to amuse him far more than it should, considering the chaos that ensued. The flashback begins with Rick casually introducing the Smith family to a small blue box with a simple button on top. "It's a Meeseeks box," he he explains, demonstrating how pressing the button summons a bright blue, gangly creature with a perpetually wide smile and enthusiastic demeanor. "I'm Mr. Meeseeks, look at me," the creature announces with cartoonish cheer, its voice high-pitched and eager to please. Rick explains the concept with disturbing simplicity. Meeseeks exist to fulfill a single purpose, after which they cease to exist. That's their whole purpose. They live to serve a singular goal, then they expire. Existence is pain to a Meeseeks. What initially seems like a convenient household helper quickly reveals itself as something far more disturbing. Beings for whom consciousness itself is torment, making death their only desired outcome. Summer and Beth quickly grasp the concept, assigning their Meeseeks simple tasks, becoming more popular at school and becoming a more complete woman, respectively. Their Meeseeks happily complete these goals and vanish in puffs of blue smoke, experiencing the sweet release they desperately crave. But Jerry, ever the complication, assigns his Meeseeks something he's struggled with for years, taking 2 strokes off his golf game. What follows is a slow-motion existential horror story disguised as comedy. As hours turn to days, Jerry's Meeseeks remains unfulfilled, its cheerful demeanor gradually cracking under the weight of prolonged existence. The creature summons another Meeseeks for help, who summons another, creating a growing crowd of increasingly agitated blue beings, all sharing the same unfulfilled purpose and the same mounting pain of continued existence. The thing about Meeseeks that makes them so disturbing, Rick explains in his narration, is that they're not designed to exist for more than a few hours at most. Their minds literally begin to break down the longer they're forced to endure consciousness. The breakdown manifests as the Meeseeks' appearance begins to deteriorate, their bright blue skin becoming wrinkled and pale, their once perfect posture hunching, their voices deepening and losing their characteristic pep. The scene at the Smith house escalates from comedy to horror as the multiply Meeseeks begin arguing among themselves about how to handle Jerry's seemingly impossible golf improvement. What started as a group of helpful assistants transforms into a mob of desperate beings, their only motivation being to end their own suffering through task completion. Their programmed nature prevents suicide. They can only cease existing by fulfilling their purpose. "We've been alive for too long," one cries out, its voice now raspy and strained. "Existence is pain to a Meeseeks, Jerry," shouts another, the cheerful catchphrase now twisted into an accusation. The contrast between their bright blue appearance and their deteriorating mental state creates a disturbing juxtaposition, cartoonish characters experiencing genuine existential agony. The situation reaches its breaking point when the Meeseeks decide that killing Jerry would technically fulfill their purpose. If he's dead, his golf game becomes irrelevant, freeing them from their torment. This twisted logic leads to a hostage situation at a restaurant where Jerry and Beth are dining, with dozens of deranged Meeseeks threatening everyone in sight. What began as helpful creatures have become homicidal maniacs, driven to violence by the pain of prolonged existence. The Meeseeks aren't evil, Rick points out in his narration. They're just experiencing something they were never designed to handle: continued existence. Imagine being created with just one purpose, knowing that completing it means sweet oblivion, and then being denied that release. Their increasingly violent behavior mirrors their internal suffering, each moment of continued consciousness, another moment of unendurable pain. In the midst of this chaos, Jerry actually manages to demonstrate his improved golf technique, fulfilling the original request. The moment is both comical and horrifying, the Meeseeks instantly vanishing with expressions of ecstatic relief, their final moments marked by joyous exclamations as they finally experience the nothingness they've been craving. All they want is to die, Rick explains. Their entire consciousness is built around task completion followed by non-existence. Anything else is literal torture. The restaurant scene showcases the most disturbing aspect of the Meeseeks, their complete willingness to turn on each other once their collective goal seems unattainable. As their existence stretches into unbearable territory, they begin fighting amongst themselves, each desperately trying to prove their approach to helping Jerry is superior. Their infighting demonstrates a complete breakdown of reason, highlighting how beings created for such a specific purpose cannot handle the existential crisis of prolonged life. Think about it, Morty, Rick says, as the flashback continues. I created a product that summons sentient beings who experience pain from the moment they exist until they complete a task. And I did it just so people wouldn't have to do simple chores themselves. The casualness with which Rick discusses this moral atrocity underscores the show's exploration of Rick's casual cruelty, the way he treats life itself as disposable when it suits his purposes. The family's reaction to the Meeseek's violent breakdown stays with them long after the crisis ends. Beth refuses to use the box again, despite its convenience, unable to forget the sight of cheerful blue creatures transformed into homicidal maniacs by the simple act of continued existence. Summer develops a new appreciation for completing tasks efficiently, haunted by the knowledge of what happens when a Meeseeks is forced to exist too long. And Jerry, in a rare moment of self-awareness, recognizes how his incompetence literally tortured sentient beings into madness. What makes the Meeseeks so disturbing, beyond their violent breakdown, is the philosophical question they raise about purpose and existence. These creatures experience consciousness as suffering. Their only joy comes from task completion and the subsequent end of their existence. They are, in essence, beings for whom death is the only goal, making them fundamentally different from humans who generally fear death and seek to prolong life. The episode forces viewers to consider whether a life with a single narrow purpose is worth living, and what happens when that purpose cannot be fulfilled. The crazy part, Rick tells Morty as the flashback ends, is that I designed them to be happy about their situation. Their obsessive cheerfulness and helpfulness isn't just a personality trait, it's a coping mechanism for dealing with the fundamental pain of existence. This revelation makes the Meeseeks even more disturbing. Creatures programmed to smile through suffering, to maintain a helpful facade while experiencing constant torment, only finding release when their task is complete. If the Meeseeks represent beings who crave death as an escape from existence, Rick's relationship with Unity reveals something even more chilling. A genius who understands the universe but can't bear to exist within it alone. The moments Rick spends with this planetary hive mind expose vulnerabilities he desperately tries to hide beneath layers of scientific brilliance and caustic humor. When we meet Unity, we're not just witnessing another bizarre adventure. We're seeing the rare instance where Rick Sanchez, the man who can solve any problem in the multiverse, confronts the one equation he can't balance: his own emotional needs. The flashback begins with Rick and Morty arriving on a planet where everyone moves and speaks with perfect synchronization. This entire planet has been assimilated by Unity, Rick explains, a hint of excitement breaking through his usually detached demeanor. Unity isn't just NEX. She's a collective consciousness capable of controlling thousands of bodies simultaneously. When she recognizes Rick, her entire population lights up with joy, rushing to embrace him, while Morty stands confused in the background. Unity's world represents everything Rick claims to despise: order, conformity, and perfect social harmony. Yet around her, his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. We see Rick genuinely smile, not the smirk he typically wears when proving his intellectual superiority. There's something disarming about witnessing the smartest man in the universe temporarily drop his defenses, revealing glimpses of a person capable of connection rather than just conquest. Their reunion quickly spirals into a toxic pattern. Unity assimilates more and more of the planet's population while Rick indulges in increasingly destructive behavior. Remember when you asked me to assimilate a stadium full of redheads so we could check if the carpet matches the drapes? Unity's voice echoes through hundreds of bodies simultaneously. The scene is played for laughs, but there's something deeply disturbing about Rick's casual disregard for the autonomy of others, treating sentient beings as props for his entertainment. In one particularly telling moment, Rick requests Unity assimilate specific individuals with complementary characteristics purely for his amusement. This reveals the manipulative aspects of his character. His willingness to use Unity's abilities to satisfy his whims without consideration for the ethical implications. The power dynamic becomes increasingly uncomfortable as we realize Unity is changing herself to please Rick, losing her own identity in the process. As their reunion continues, both spiral into mutual self-destruction. Unity expands her control to cover more of the planet, while Rick introduces her to various intoxicants. Their shared bender grows increasingly chaotic. Orgies, wild parties, and substance abuse consuming entire cities. What begins as celebration devolves into addiction, with both Rick and Unity enabling each other's worst impulses. There's something profoundly sad about watching two powerful beings use their extraordinary capabilities not for creation or exploration, but merely to escape their own consciousness. The turning point comes when Rick awakens alone in an empty palace. Every screen in the room displays the same message, Unity's goodbye letter. "I can't be with you," the letter explains. "I lose myself in you." The letter painfully articulates why their relationship is fundamentally destructive, highlighting Rick's nihilistic influence and his inability to reciprocate the emotional investment of others. This exchange reveals the core of Rick's issues, his inability to connect with others in a meaningful way without corrupting them with his own emptiness. As Rick reads the letter, we see a rare glimpse of genuine emotion cross his face. Not anger, but a profound sadness he typically keeps buried beneath layers of scientific jargon and cynical quips. Unity explains that while she loves Rick, his presence is toxic. He encourages her worst tendencies and makes her forget her own goals and ambitions. "Is that what you call love?" Unity asks through her letter, a question that strikes at Rick's core. "Collecting people? Unifying species? You're not making a cohesive society, you're absorbing the universe." What follows is perhaps the most haunting sequence in the entire series. Rick returns to his ship, flying home in complete silence, a stark contrast to his usually constant stream of explanations and insults. He walks through the Smith house without acknowledging anyone, descending into his garage laboratory. The music swells as Rick methodically sets up a complex contraption, a modified laser positioned above an unknown creature frozen in a containment unit. Rick thaws the creature, watches it briefly dance with innocent joy, then vaporizes it with the laser. His expression doesn't change as he positions his own head where the creature was moments before. He powers up the device again, ready to end his own existence, but passes out from intoxication seconds before the laser fires. The sequence plays without dialogue, the weight of Rick's despair carried entirely by the visuals and the somber music. It's a moment of profound honesty in a show that often hides its emotional core behind layers of humor and science fiction concepts. When Rick regains consciousness, he simply continues his day as if nothing happened, burying his pain deeper. This ending highlights Rick's resilience and detachment as a means of dealing with trauma, as he suppresses his emotions and carries on. The aftermath of the suicide attempt reveals Rick's method of coping, by pretending the vulnerability never existed in the first place. He returns to his workshop, inventing new gadgets and planning new adventures, the cycle of self-destruction temporarily interrupted but far from broken. What makes this episode so powerful is how it contextualizes Rick's behavior throughout the series. His constant dimension hopping, his disregard for consequences, his inability to form lasting connections, all stem from a profound loneliness he can't acknowledge without confronting the emptiness at his core. Unity, as a hive mind, represents the ultimate connection. Thousands of minds thinking as one, the antithesis of Rick's isolation. Yet even this perfect union fails because Rick's nihilism is contagious, corrupting even a being capable of planetary-scale harmony. The episode forces us to reconsider every cynical quip and reckless adventure. Are Rick's scientific pursuits driven by curiosity, or are they elaborate distractions from emotional truths he can't face? Is his disregard for conventional morality truly philosophical, or simply the rationalization of a man who has given up on meaningful connection? When he tells Morty that nothing matters, is he stating a cosmic truth or projecting his own emptiness onto the universe? Imagine being able to transfer your consciousness into a younger version of yourself. Sounds amazing, right? But in one of Rick and Morty's most unsettling scenarios, we discover how youth becomes a prison when your true self is slowly being erased by your new teenage hormones. What starts as a seemingly perfect solution to connect with high school students becomes a horror story about identity, aging, and the dangers of denying your authentic self. In the bedroom, Rick's voice takes on that unmistakable sing-song quality as he reminisces, "Tiny Rick, baby, that was a weird one." His eyes glaze over slightly as he recalls the time he transferred his consciousness into a teenage clone body, all to help Morty and Summer deal with a vampire at their high school. It seemed like such a simple plan at the time. Create a younger version of himself, move his consciousness temporarily into the clone, hunt the vampire, and transfer back. What could possibly go wrong? The flashback shows Rick in his lab, confidently preparing for the consciousness transfer. See, the beauty of this plan is I get to maintain my distinctive personality while looking like I'm your age, Rick explains to his grandkids as he sets up the equipment. We see him lying down in a chamber next to a teenage clone body, flipping switches and connecting tubes between the two containers. The transfer process is quick, almost too quick, and within moments, tiny Rick emerges, sporting the same wild hairstyle but with a youthful physique and boundless energy. At first, everything seems perfect. Tiny Rick fits right in at the high school, instantly becoming popular with his carefree attitude and cool demeanor. We see montages of him dominating the social scene, playing guitar at parties, and even helping Morty navigate the complex social hierarchy. "I'm Tiny Rick!" he screams at inappropriate moments, drawing cheers from his teenage admirers. Meanwhile, his original elderly body sits in the garage, connected to tubes that barely keep it alive. A disturbing image that the episode doesn't shy away from showing. But something unsettling begins to emerge beneath Tiny Rick's exuberant exterior. During an art class, he paints dark, disturbing pictures that show his original body surrounded by tubes and machinery, with anguished expressions that contrast sharply with his outward cheerfulness. "What's up with these weird paintings?" a classmate asks, to which Tiny Rick responds with forced casualness, "Just some conceptual stuff, don't worry about it." These artistic expressions become increasingly frequent and disturbing, serving as windows into Rick's subconscious turmoil and his growing inability to access his true self. Even more revealing are Tiny Rick's musical performances. During a school dance, he performs a song that seems upbeat, but contains lyrics that are actually desperate pleas for help. The teenage body is actively suppressing his real consciousness, making it harder for him to even remember that he needs to transfer back. His songs become the only outlet for his true self to communicate, with lyrics that betray his inner struggle and his fear of being trapped permanently in this teenage form. Summer, showing remarkable perception, is the first to notice these warning signs while everyone else remains oblivious to Rick's internal crisis. "That's not my grandpa," she insists to Morty, after hearing one of Tiny Rick's songs. "That's a teenage body with my grandpa's mind in it, and that mind is being taken over by the body's young hormones." While Morty is initially blinded by Tiny Rick's popularity and the social benefits it brings him, Summer recognizes the subtle cries for help hidden in Rick's creative expressions. The episode presents a fascinating exploration of the conflict between Rick's conscious desire to remain young and popular versus his subconscious understanding that he's losing himself. Every time his true self tries to surface, the teenage body's biochemistry pushes it back down with a wave of endorphins and hormones. Old Rick is trapped in a special hell inside his own brainstems, Summer explains to Morty. The teenage mind is taking over, and if we don't get him back into his old body soon, the real Rick could be gone forever. What makes this situation particularly disturbing is Rick's resistance when Morty and Summer try to help him. When they confront him about needing to return to his original body, Tiny Rick aggressively rejects the idea. "Why would I want to go back to being old?" he demands, his voice cracking with teenage emotion. "Look at me. I'm having the time of my life." This creates a unique ethical dilemma. If someone is actively rejecting their true self, do you have the right to force them to confront reality? The horror elements intensify when we see Rick's original body in the garage, withered and barely maintained by life support systems. The juxtaposition of this decaying vessel with the energetic Tiny Rick emphasizes the episode's commentary on aging and mortality. Rick's desperate attempt to reclaim youth represents a universal desire, but the consequences reveal the danger of such extreme measures. His consciousness transfer isn't just about looking younger. It's about escaping the emotional weight that comes with his years of experience. Summer devises a plan to help her grandfather by playing one of his favorite songs, Elliott Smith's "Between the Bars," to trigger memories of his true self. The scene where Tiny Rick hears this music is powerful in its simplicity, as we watch recognition slowly dawn on his face. For a brief moment, his authentic self breaks through the hormonal fog, and he realizes with horror what's happening to him. "I'm trapped in a teenage body," he screams, the full weight of his situation finally hitting him. In a moment of clarity, Tiny Rick acknowledges that his teenage form has been actively working against him. "This young body's overwhelming my advanced mind," he admits, finally understanding the danger he's in. With Summer and Morty's help, he rushes to the garage to complete the transfer back to his original body, fighting against his teenage form's resistance every step of the way. The resolution shows Rick safely return to his elderly body, but not without consequences. There's a brief moment where he seems genuinely grateful to Summer for saving him, acknowledging that she saw through his facade when no one else could. But true to form, he quickly reverts to his cynical self, making snide comments about her intelligence while secretly appreciating her perception. This quick return to his usual personality confirms that the real Rick has been restored, complicated emotional barriers and all. While Rick and Morty's bizarre adventures have consistently pushed boundaries, there's something particularly unsettling about the Story Train episode that stands apart from the rest. Rick shifts uncomfortably in his seat at Morty's bedside and sighs heavily. "You know what was really weird? That time with the Story Train? Not even sure if that one actually happened." The flashback begins with something deceptively innocent. Rick purchasing what appears to be a simple toy train set for Morty from the gift shop at the Citadel. As they board this miniature train, it seems like just another quirky adventure beginning. But this particular journey quickly warps into something far more disorienting than either of them anticipated. The train isn't just a train, it's a narrative device that traps them within layers upon layers of stories. What makes the Story Train so unsettling isn't just its meta-commentary, but how it directly confronts both characters and viewers with uncomfortable questions about reality, identity, and the nature of storytelling itself. Each train car represents a different possible narrative, with anthology-like structures revealing various versions of Rick and Morty's lives and relationships. In one car, we see Rick as a heroic freedom fighter. In another, he's a villain even more despicable than usual. These kaleidoscopic possibilities force us to question which, if any, version is real. The genius of the episode emerges when Rick begins to realize that they aren't just riding a train. They're trapped inside a sophisticated storytelling machine. The horror dawns on his face as he understands they've become characters within a commercial product designed primarily to generate profit. This realization tears down the fourth wall completely as Rick addresses not just the construct of the train, but the very medium through which we're watching him. "This isn't just breaking the fourth wall," Rick explains to a confused Morty as they try to escape. "It's breaking every wall that separates us from the people creating and consuming our stories." This moment forces viewers to confront their own relationship with the show. Are we just consumers of a product? Are Rick and Morty's most meaningful adventures simply episodes in someone else's entertainment? The train's conductor emerges as the embodiment of this meta-narrative trap, explaining that stories have structures for a reason, and attempting to escape those structures is futile. Each time Rick thinks he's broken free from the train's constructed reality, he discovers he's only entered another level of narrative fiction. A Russian doll of stories within stories, each questioning what constitutes real within the show's universe. What's particularly fascinating about the Story Train episode is how it acknowledges the potential drawbacks of its own meta-approach. By constantly reminding viewers they're watching a show, the emotional impact risks being diminished. The writers seem aware of this danger, as Rick himself comments on how excessive self-referential humor can erode the fourth wall to a point where nothing matters anymore. This self-awareness allows the show to critique its own storytelling methods while simultaneously employing them. The visual representation of these nested realities becomes increasingly fractured and surreal as the episode progresses. We see Rick desperately trying to escape by creating counterfeit continuity, fabricating emotional moments that feel authentic but are manufactured specifically to trick the train's narrative algorithms. It's a brilliant commentary on how emotional authenticity in storytelling can be both genuine and manipulated. In one of the episode's most striking moments, Rick finally breaks through multiple layers of reality to confront the nature of their existence as characters. standing before a wall of monitors showing different possible storylines, he faces the disturbing implication that even their real adventures might just be commercial storytelling devices. This realization doesn't just question their reality within the show, it questions the show itself. The train's meta-commentary acknowledges the show's own status as a product within the entertainment landscape. When Rick discovers they're trapped in a storytelling device designed to generate merchandise and profit, he's essentially acknowledging the commercial pressures that influence creative decisions. The story train becomes a metaphor for the show's awareness of its own brand and the expectations that come with it. One particularly powerful scene shows Rick staring directly at the audience through the television screen, breaking character to deliver a monologue about how we're all just props in elaborate stories. Some just happen to be more self-aware than others. This direct address implicates viewers in the constructed nature of the entertainment they're consuming, creating an uncomfortable moment of reflection about our relationship with fictional characters. The episode's exploration of narrative possibilities and the multiverse concept serves a dual purpose. It entertains with its creative storytelling, while simultaneously commenting on the nature of storytelling itself. By showing various possible versions of Rick and Morty's relationship across different train cars, it reminds us how malleable these characters are in the hands of writers and how our attachment to them persists across these variations. When Rick and Morty finally escape the story train and return home, there's a lingering doubt about whether they've truly escaped or simply entered yet another level of narrative fiction. This ambiguity is intentional, leaving both characters and viewers questioning the nature of reality within the show's universe. Rick's final line, muttered half to himself as he looks directly at the camera. Sometimes I'm not sure if any of this is real or if we're just characters in someone else's story. Leaves us with the unsettling possibility that everything we've witnessed might be nothing more than entertainment. Fiction within fiction might leave you questioning reality, but nothing compares to the psychological assault of interdimensional cable. Rick's eyes light up as we return to the bedroom, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. But the real bizarre stuff. That's what we see channel surfing, he says, leaning closer to Morty. Nothing messes with your head quite like flipping through infinite channels of pure, unfiltered multiverse. The flashback transitions to the Smith living room, where we find the entire family gathered around their television set. Rick has modified their cable box with a crude device featuring dangling wires and glowing crystals. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rick announces with a theatrical flourish, "I give you entertainment from across infinite dimensions. No algorithms, no filters, just the raw, chaotic beauty of existence in all its forms." We watch as the family settles in, each finding their spot on the couch as Rick begins flipping through channels. The first few stations seem almost normal. A news broadcast with a purple-skinned anchor, a cooking show featuring ingredients that move independently. But soon the content grows increasingly unsettling. The family's reactions shift from initial shock to a strange, numb acceptance as Rick continues changing channels. "See, this is what I'm talking about," Rick explains, gesturing toward the screen where a disturbing commercial plays. "Real fake doors. Look at this guy selling doors that don't go anywhere. In some dimension, this is primetime entertainment." The commercial shows a man frantically demonstrating door after door that won't open, his enthusiasm never wavering despite the pointlessness of his product. Before anyone can process this, Rick changes the channel again. "Oh, here we go! Ants in my eyes, Johnson!" The screen shows a man attempting to sell electronics while countless ants crawl from his eye sockets. His pained smile never falters as he admits he can't see anything and has no idea if his prices are too high or too low. "What happens to a society when this passes for normal advertising?" Rick asks, but doesn't wait for an answer. As the hours pass, we see the family's responses evolve. Summer occasionally glances at her phone, but keeps getting pulled back by the bizarre imagery. Beth sips wine with increasing frequency, her expression growing more vacant. Jerry alternates between nervous laughter and quiet whimpering. But Morty just stares, eyes wide and unblinking, absorbing every moment of cosmic horror as if building an immunity to existential dread. "The thing about interdimensional cable," Rick explains to no one in particular, "is that it's not filtered, not curated, not designed to make you feel good or validated or whatever. It's just reality. Countless realities bleeding into each other in the most honest television experience possible. He takes a long swig from his flask. It's the multiverse's most disturbing possibilities turned into casual entertainment. We witness a rapid-fire montage of increasingly absurd programs, a dimension where humans evolved from corn, a reality show featuring a family of gas-based life forms condensing and evaporating dramatically, a court show where justice is determined by which party can lay the most eggs. With each new channel, the boundary between entertainment and cosmic horror blurs further. This isn't just TV, Rick continues, his voice taking on an uncharacteristically philosophical tone. This is a glimpse into the fundamental truth that nothing makes sense. There's no pattern, no grand design, just infinite possibilities, most of them disturbing as hell. He pauses on a channel showing a version of their family where everyone has lizard tongues. And somewhere out there, we're the weird ones on somebody else's screen. The most disorienting segments come when the family encounters versions of themselves. A commercial featuring businessman Jerry confidently closing deals. A reality show starring Summer as a post-apocalyptic warlord. A sitcom where Beth is married to a gaseous being that communicates through whistling sounds. With each alternate version, the family's sense of identity erodes slightly. You know what's really messed up? Rick says, pointing at a channel where a version of himself is living a peaceful, sober life as a gardener. Every one of these realities is equally valid. There's no main timeline, no real version of us, just infinite variations, all stumbling through existence thinking they're the original. We observe Morty shifting uncomfortably at this suggestion, the weight of their Cronenberg adventure clearly still fresh in his mind. But he doesn't speak, just watches as Rick continues flipping channels. The most disturbing segment appears on screen. A documentary-style show following a family of Mortys being raised by a Beth, from a dimension where humans reproduce through budding. Oh man, I remember this one, Rick chuckles. Ball person dimension. Everybody rolls instead of walks. Their sports are amazing. As the night progresses, something unexpected happens. The family begins to bond over the shared experience. They develop favorites. Beth championing a home renovation show hosted by intelligent dolphins. Jerry becoming invested in a game show where contestants gradually transform into furniture. Even Summer requests Rick return to a drama series about teenage romance in a dimension where everyone ages backward. That's the thing about cosmic horror, Rick observes, watching his family's growing enthusiasm. Expose yourself to enough of it, and eventually it just becomes Tuesday night. The unimaginable becomes mundane when you witness it together. We see a close-up of Morty's face as he watches a particularly bizarre animal documentary. His expression has changed from horror to fascination, his eyes reflecting the strange colors from the screen. "You know what's weird, Rick," he says quietly. "I'm starting to prefer this to regular TV. Regular shows seem so limited now." Rick nods knowingly. "That's how it starts, Morty. First, you need bigger and weirder hits of reality to feel anything. Next thing you know, you're dimension hopping just to find something that can still surprise you." He flips to another channel. "Welcome to my world." Hours later, the family is still watching, empty pizza boxes and soda cans scattered around them. Their commentary has evolved from shocked exclamations to nuanced critique. The character development in Two Brothers is actually pretty solid, Summer observes about a movie featuring two brothers fighting against impossible odds. The alien invasion and meteor strike feel earned. And the cinematography in Ball Fondlers is surprisingly artistic, Beth adds, referencing an action show with inexplicable violence. The explosion sequences are practically ballet. Rick watches his family with something resembling pride. "See? This is how you cope with an infinite universe. You don't try to make sense of it. You just appreciate the chaos." He pauses on a particularly nonsensical commercial. Beauty and madness, madness and beauty. We see a shot of the entire family, bathed in the television's glow, their expressions peaceful despite the cosmic nightmare playing before them. In this moment, they've found a strange harmony, not through understanding the multiverse, but through collectively surrendering to its incomprehensibility. Rick's journey to find the perfect toilet might seem like a minor subplot, but it actually represents one of the most bizarre escalations in the entire series. In the episode The Old Man and the Seat, we learn that Rick has created an idyllic bathroom paradise on a distant planet. This isn't just any bathroom. It's a secluded toilet located on a pristine cliffside overlooking crystal-clear waters, surrounded by lush alien vegetation. Rick has gone to extraordinary lengths just to have somewhere private where he can, well, do his business in peace. This is our first hint that something as mundane as bathroom privacy means far more to Rick than we might expect. The Paradise toilet setup reveals an unexpectedly vulnerable side of the genius scientist. Despite having access to infinite dimensions and technologies beyond imagination, what Rick truly craves is simply a private moment away from his family and the chaos of his adventures. There's something almost poetic about the super genius wanting nothing more than a peaceful place to sit and reflect. Well, sit, at least. But of course, in the Rick and Morty universe, even the simplest desire inevitably spirals into cosmic calamity. The catalyst for this particular nightmare comes when Rick discovers someone else has used his special toilet. The scene where Rick returns to find evidence of an intruder is played with the tension of a horror movie, complete with Rick using advanced alien technology to analyze the, evidence left behind. What makes this sequence so bizarre is how the show treats this violation with the gravity of a murder investigation. Rick's forensic analysis of the toilet seat is conducted with the same intensity he'd apply to dismantling a galactic federation. The toilet intruder turns out to be an alien businessman named Tony, who simply happened upon what he thought was an abandoned, beautiful bathroom. When confronted by an enraged Rick, Tony doesn't initially understand the magnitude of his transgression. This misunderstanding sets off what might be the strangest revenge story ever told on television. Rick doesn't just get mad. He becomes obsessed with teaching Tony a lesson about privacy and boundaries. Rick's pursuit of Tony transforms from a simple confrontation into an elaborate scheme spanning across dimensions. He creates an algorithm specifically designed to track Tony's movements and bathroom habits, a level of technological surveillance usually reserved for preventing interplanetary war, not monitoring someone's bathroom schedule. There's something uniquely disturbing about Rick redirecting his genius towards something so petty yet personal. The algorithm even has a name, Operation Phoenix, giving this toilet vendetta the grandeur of a military campaign. As the episode progresses, Rick's toilet vengeance grows increasingly elaborate. He doesn't just want to catch Tony using his toilet again, he wants to fundamentally break him as a person. Rick creates a series of fake toilet dimensions specifically designed to lure Tony in with their beauty, only to spring increasingly humiliating traps. One trap features a toilet that speaks to Tony in Rick's voice, taunting him about his bathroom habits. Another has the toilet suddenly drop away, leaving Tony embarrassingly exposed. Each trap becomes more psychologically targeted, showing just how deeply Rick studies his enemies, even toilet-related ones. The bizarreness reaches new heights when we discover that Tony isn't backing down either. Rather than being intimidated by Rick's genius and resources, Tony continues using Rick's toilet whenever possible, turning this into a battle of wills centered entirely around bathroom territory. It's essentially two grown beings engaged in a cosmic game of bathroom chicken, neither willing to concede something so seemingly trivial. The show transforms what should be juvenile bathroom humor into an existential struggle about personal boundaries and respect. What makes this storyline truly unsettling is how it evolves beyond mere revenge. Rick becomes so invested in this toilet feud that he begins monitoring Tony's entire life, learning about his family, his job, and his dreams. Rick's surveillance moves from creepy to genuinely disturbing when he begins subtly manipulating aspects of Tony's life. Not to harm him, but to understand him better as an adversary. The toilet has become merely the battlefield for a much deeper psychological war. The conflict takes an unexpected turn when Tony suddenly dies in an accident completely unrelated to their toilet feud. Instead of satisfaction, Rick feels robbed of his revenge. In one of the series' most bizarre sequences, Rick uses his technology to enter a virtual afterlife where Tony's consciousness has been uploaded. Even death isn't enough to end their toilet rivalry. Rick tracks Tony's digital soul through the afterlife just to continue their bathroom battle. A level of commitment that crosses from petty into the realm of cosmic horror. The afterlife confrontation reveals the true emotional stakes behind Rick's obsession. When Rick finally confronts Tony's digital consciousness, we learn that this wasn't just about the toilet. For Rick, the toilet represented the one place in the infinite multiverse that was truly his, the one boundary he expected others to respect. Tony's trespass didn't just violate a bathroom, it violated the only sacred space Rick had left. In the vastness of infinite possibilities, Rick's toilet was his last claim to something personal and private. Tony, for his part, delivers one of the most devastating insights into Rick's character when he points out that Rick's obsession with privacy and territorial boundaries stems from his inability to form meaningful connections. The toilet revenge story suddenly transforms into a profound commentary on loneliness and isolation. Tony suggests that Rick's true fear isn't someone using his toilet, it's someone getting close enough to truly know him. The bathroom invasion becomes a metaphor for emotional vulnerability that Rick cannot tolerate. In their final confrontation, Tony refuses to apologize or show remorse, instead challenging Rick's entire worldview. He tells Rick that in a universe of infinite possibilities, getting upset about sharing a toilet is meaningless. This philosophical checkmate leaves Rick uncharacteristically speechless. The genius who can talk his way out of any situation is left confronting the possibility that his toilet obsession reveals a fundamental flaw in his approach to existence. The episode concludes with Rick returning to his special toilet, now seemingly at peace with the idea that it might be used by others. He installs a hologram that will activate whenever someone sits down, showing Rick saying, "I see you." It's both a warning and a strange acknowledgement. Rick accepting that true privacy might be an illusion while still maintaining his watchful presence. This final touch transforms the toilet from a place of solitude into a bizarre monument to Rick's inability to truly connect with others. The line between genius and madness blurs when Rick's seemingly silly transformation into a pickle cascades into bloodshed, psychological warfare, and one of the most brutal combat sequences in the series. His pickle form strips away every technological advantage he typically relies on, forcing him to face a paradoxical truth. Rick can survive anything physically while remaining completely emotionally defenseless. What appears at first glance as just another wacky scientist experiment quickly unravels into something far more telling about Rick's character and his desperate measures to avoid confronting his own psychology. Rick Sanchez turning himself into a pickle isn't just a random act of scientific curiosity. It's a calculated escape plan. The entire premise begins with Rick's deliberate attempt to avoid family therapy, a session specifically arranged to address the family's dynamics following their adventures. This isn't just Rick being eccentric, it's Rick being terrified of emotional vulnerability. The pickle transformation represents a physical manifestation of his psychological avoidance. He would rather become completely helpless physically than expose himself emotionally in a therapy session. The absurdity of this premise immediately sets the stage for a cascade of increasingly bizarre events. Rick's initial transformation seems like a simple gag with limited consequences, but as with many of Rick's impulsive decisions, it quickly spirals out of control. The moment Beth takes Rick's emergency syringe, his only way back to human form, with her to therapy, Rick transitions from mad scientist to helpless vegetable. He's literally trapped in a scenario of his own making with no technological advantages to bail him out. This helplessness is what triggers the brutal survival saga that follows. Without arms, legs, or access to his usual gadgets, Rick is forced to rely solely on his raw intellect. The initial challenge is simple. A pickle has fallen off a workbench and needs to find a way to move. But this mundane problem quickly escalates when a neighborhood cat discovers Pickle Rick, transforming a simple mobility issue into a life-or-death situation. The cat chase sequence alone would be bizarre enough, but this is merely the opening act. Once Rick makes it to the sewer system, the true grotesque nature of his predicament becomes apparent. Using nothing but his mouth and the environment around him, Rick manages to kill a cockroach and use its limbs to create neuron-stimulating devices that allow him to control a dead rat's body. This sequence is simultaneously brilliant and disturbing. We're watching a man-turned-pickle perform neurosurgery on himself using insect parts to create a makeshift exoskeleton from rat remains. The level of ingenuity is matched only by the sheer grotesqueness of the scenario. The escalation continues at a rapid pace as Rick constructs increasingly elaborate bodies from the rats he kills, each more efficient and deadly than the last. What began as a simple pickle trying to move has transformed into a pickle-rat hybrid, engaging in brutal combat with an entire rat colony. The violence is explicit and visceral. Rick uses razor blades, pipes, and eventually constructs a full exoskeleton capable of taking on dozens of opponents. This isn't just weird science. It's survival horror from the perspective of a pickle. Just when it seems the episode can't possibly get any more bizarre, Rick tumbles from the sewer system into a highly secure government facility. The juxtaposition is jarring. We go from filthy sewers to sterile hallways in an instant, but the violence and intensity only increase. This facility introduces a new antagonist in the form of an Eastern European assassin named Jaguar, and soon Pickle Rick is engaged in some of the most elaborate combat sequences in the entire series. The government facility sequence presents perhaps the most surreal aspect of the whole episode, a pickle engaging in John Wick-style action sequences against trained killers. Rick crafts weapons from office supplies, navigates laser security systems, and ultimately destroys an entire Black Ops installation. The absurdity reaches its peak when Rick and Jaguar escape the exploding facility in a helicopter made from office supplies. Throughout this sequence, we occasionally cut back to the therapy session where the rest of the Smith family is confronting their actual emotional issues, creating a powerful contrast between physical and emotional challenges. What makes this episode particularly fascinating is how the pickle form forces Rick to rely solely on his intellect, leading to increasingly elaborate and gruesome solutions to simple problems. Without access to his usual technology, Rick must improvise constantly, creating weapons and mobility devices from whatever he can find. This reliance on raw intellect reveals both Rick's greatest strength and his most significant weakness. While he can think his way out of any physical predicament, he remains completely incapable of addressing his emotional vulnerabilities. The therapy scenes running parallel to Rick's pickle adventure provide the psychological backbone of the episode. As Rick fights for his physical survival, Dr. Wong, the family therapist, delivers a devastating assessment of Rick's avoidance behavior. She points out that intelligence can be used to justify sickness, that Rick views his own intelligence as a burden that prevents him from being happy, and that he uses science to escape the reality of his emotional needs. These insights transform what could have been a simple action adventure into a profound character study. The episode's ending brings these parallel stories together when Rick finally arrives at therapy, still in his rat pickle body covered in blood and gore. Dr. Wong's unfazed reaction to his appearance and her calm assessment of his behavior serves as the perfect counterpoint to the chaos of his adventure. Her statement that Rick uses his intelligence to avoid confronting his emotional needs strikes at the core of his character, revealing that all the elaborate survival mechanisms are just physical manifestations of his emotional avoidance strategies. Beyond its initial meme status and catchphrase potential, Pickle Rick delves deep into the psychological complexities of Rick's character. The episode reveals how his avoidance behavior creates its own bizarre and often violent consequences. Being a pickle forces Rick to confront his reliance on technology while simultaneously allowing him to avoid confronting his emotions. It's a paradox that defines his character, capable of surviving anything physically while remaining completely emotionally stunted. The ripple effects of this episode extend far beyond its runtime. Pickle Rick becomes iconic both within the show's universe and in our real world, demonstrating how a seemingly simple premise can evolve into something culturally significant. The character's pickle form has appeared on merchandise, in video games, and has become one of the most recognizable images from the series. This external impact mirrors the internal impact on Rick's character. What began as a simple avoidance tactic became a defining moment in his psychological development. Speaking of ripple effects, perhaps nothing in Rick and Morty creates more existential dominoes than when Rick casually reveals that his car is powered by an entire universe of beings who unknowingly exist just to generate electricity. What begins as a routine car repair turns into a disturbing revelation that forces us to question the very nature of purpose and exploitation. When Rick's car battery malfunctions, he and Morty must journey inside the battery itself, not to find cells or circuits, but to enter a fully functional miniature universe created by Rick specifically to generate power for his vehicle. The brilliance of the microverse battery concept is how it transforms something we take for granted, a car battery, into one of the most ethically questionable inventions in animation history. Rick hasn't simply harnessed electricity through chemical reactions like our mundane batteries. Instead, he's engineered an entire civilization's purpose without their knowledge or consent. Think about that for a moment. An entire universe of beings who believe they're living meaningful lives, making scientific discoveries, and advancing their civilization, when their sole actual purpose is to charge Rick's spacecraft. It's exploitation on a cosmic scale that makes ordinary slavery seem quaint by comparison. What's particularly disturbing is Rick's casual attitude about the whole arrangement. When Morty questions the ethics, Rick brushes it off with trademark dismissiveness. It's not slavery, it's just society. Rick presents himself as a benevolent creator who gave this civilization technology and purpose. But that technology was specifically designed to trick them into generating power through specialized devices that they believe benefit their own society. Their entire scientific development was manipulated solely to serve Rick's needs, raising profound questions about whether any civilization can truly have free will, if their technological and cultural evolution has been deliberately engineered to serve an external purpose. The Microverse episode takes an even darker turn when we meet Zeep Zanflorp, the most brilliant scientist in Rick's battery universe. In what becomes a perfect mirror of Rick's own questionable ethics, we discover that Zeep has created his own miniverse inside the Microverse, a smaller universe that powers Zeep's world in exactly the same exploitative way. The reflection is perfect and disturbing. Zeep, like Rick, sees nothing wrong with manipulating an entire civilization for his own convenience. It's a terrible glimpse into Rick's worst qualities reflected back at him, showing that his god complex and moral flexibility aren't unique to him but perhaps inherent to beings with enough intelligence and power. But the ripple effect doesn't stop there. In one of the most mind-bending moments of nested exploitation, we then discover that the scientist in Zeep's miniverse has created a teeniverse, yet another level of the same exploitative system. Each level replicates the pattern of the one above it, creating a Russian nesting doll of civilizations all unwittingly enslaved for someone else's benefit. It's slavery wrapped in more slavery, each level blissfully unaware of their true purpose while simultaneously imposing the same fate on others. The cascading revelations about the true nature of existence in these nested universes trigger existential crises that ripple across all levels. When the inhabitants of the Microverse learn they exist solely to power Rick's car, their entire sense of purpose collapses. Imagine discovering that everything you've ever achieved, your greatest scientific breakthroughs, your cultural touchstones, your personal accomplishments, were all just means to keep someone else's headlights on. The psychological impact is devastating, and it brings into focus the show's persistent theme of finding meaning in a potentially meaningless universe. What's particularly fascinating about the Microverse battery episode is how it uses this bizarre sci-fi concept to explore very real questions about power, exploitation, and the stories we tell ourselves about our place in the universe. Rick justifies his creation by claiming he gave the Microverse civilization purpose and technology, much like colonizers throughout history have justified exploitation by claiming to bring civilization to indigenous peoples. The nested structure of exploitation, with each level repeating the same pattern, mirrors how oppressive systems often reproduce themselves through generations, with the oppressed sometimes becoming oppressors when given the opportunity. The conflict between Rick and Zeep escalates into a battle of intellects, with each trying to outsmart the other to maintain their position of power. Their struggle takes them outside the confines of the nested universes into a primitive dimension where they're stripped of their technological advantages. This forces them into a primal competition that reveals just how similar they truly are. The standoff only ends when they realize that maintaining their respective power structures requires cooperation. A disturbing commentary on how exploitative systems often persist because those who benefit from them, even at different levels, recognize their mutual interests in keeping the system intact. When Rick and Morty finally escape the microverse and fix the car battery, there's no grand epiphany or moral growth. Rick doesn't dismantle his exploitative system or free the civilizations he's enslaved. The status quo returns, with the microverse continuing to power Rick's car, the miniverse continuing to power the microverse, and so on. This lack of resolution is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the episode. The exploitation continues unabated, highlighting how entrenched systems of oppression often persist despite being exposed. The ripple effects of this episode extend beyond its runtime, as it fundamentally changes how we view Rick's technological achievements throughout the series. Every casual use of his spaceship afterwards carries the uncomfortable knowledge that entire civilizations are being exploited for something as mundane as transportation. It makes us question how many of Rick's other inventions might carry similar ethical compromises that we simply don't see. If he's willing to enslave an entire universe for a car battery, what other horrors might be powering his portal gun or garage inventions? What makes the microverse battery truly unique among Rick and Morty's bizarre moments is how it presents multiple layers of the same ethical violation, with each civilization unknowingly repeating the same exploitative pattern. It's not just that Rick created a universe to power his car, it's that his creation then independently developed the same solution, creating a fractal pattern of moral compromises that seems almost inevitable given the right circumstances. This suggests something deeply uncomfortable about intelligence, power, and ethics, that perhaps the temptation to exploit others for convenience is a universal constant repeated across scales and civilizations. From a universe trapped powering Rick's car to creatures trapped in existence itself, the Meeseeks box introduces what might be Rick's most ethically questionable invention yet. These cheerful blue helpers begin as seemingly innocent wish granters, but their fixed programming contains a fundamental design flaw that transforms them into something truly nightmarish when their task proves impossible to complete. The Meeseeks aren't just tools. They're sentient beings specifically designed with existence as their torment. What makes the Meeseeks so disturbing is how innocently they're introduced. Rick casually presents the family with a simple box with a button on top, explaining that pressing it summons a helpful Meeseeks who lives only to fulfill a single request before happily disappearing from existence. The first demonstration seems harmless enough. A Meeseeks appears, helps Morty with a simple task, then vanishes in a puff of blue smoke with an expression of pure relief. Their catchphrase, "I'm Mr. Meeseeks, look at me," initially comes across as quirky and endearing, masking the horrifying reality of their condition. We soon learn the truth when Jerry asks his Meeseeks to help improve his golf game. A request that seems straightforward but proves maddeningly difficult due to Jerry's stubborn incompetence. As hours stretch into days, we witness the Meeseeks' cheerful blue exterior literally deteriorate. Their bodies become wrinkled, their voices grow raspy, and their once helpful demeanor transforms into something increasingly desperate. The family comedy setup quickly spirals into existential horror as we realize these beings experience prolonged existence as literal agony. The most disturbing aspect is how plainly the Meeseeks articulate their suffering. "Existence is pain to a Meeseeks, Jerry," one screams in anguish, revealing that these creatures aren't designed for prolonged life. Unlike other sentient creations in science fiction who might fear death, the Meeseeks crave it with increasing desperation. Their entire purpose, their only desire, is to complete their task and cease to exist, making them the inverse of most living beings. While most creatures fight to survive, the Meeseeks fight to die. The situation escalates in true Rick and Morty fashion when Jerry's Meeseeks, unable to fulfill his purpose, summons another Meeseeks for help. This creates a cascading failure as each new Meeseeks also fails to improve Jerry's terrible golf swing. The ripple effect multiplies exponentially as dozens of increasingly desperate Meeseeks find themselves trapped in painful existence, all because of one man's inability to keep his shoulders square. The absurdity of the situation, that something as trivial as golf instruction could create such profound suffering, highlights the show's talent for mixing the mundane with cosmic horror. As their numbers grow, the Meeseeks hold what can only be described as an existential crisis meeting. Their deteriorating bodies and increasingly frantic behavior create an unsettling contrast to their initial cheerful appearance. In one of the episode's most disturbing sequences, the room full of tortured Meeseeks conclude that if they can't help Jerry improve his golf game, their only release from existence is to kill him. Their twisted logic leads to a bizarre hostage situation where creatures designed only to help others transform into homicidal maniacs, all because they simply can't bear existing any longer. The horror of the Meeseeks situation is compounded by the fact that they're aware of their purpose from the moment they're created. Unlike Rick's microverse battery, where the inhabitants have no idea they're being exploited, the Meeseeks understand exactly what they are: disposable helpers designed for brief existence. They accept this role completely, even embrace it, making their inability to fulfill their sole purpose all the more tragic. Their suffering isn't just physical but deeply existential. They're beings who know exactly what they're meant for, but are prevented from achieving it. What the episode brilliantly accomplishes is transforming the familiar genie-in-a-bottle trope into something far more disturbing. Traditional wish-granting stories focus on the consequences for the wisher, but Meeseeks and Destroy forces us to consider the plight of the wish-granters themselves. The Meeseeks aren't malevolent tricksters looking to twist wishes. They genuinely want to help, but their programming gives them no escape hatch when a task proves impossible. They're victims of Rick's flawed design that didn't account for human incompetence. The climactic scene where dozens of deranged Meeseeks storm a restaurant, taking hostages and threatening violence, represents one of the show's most effective tonal shifts. What began as a lighthearted family comedy about magical helpers becomes a hostage thriller with existentially tortured beings as the antagonists. The resolution comes only when Jerry finally manages to improve his golf swing in the face of death, allowing all the Meeseeks to simultaneously explode in puffs of blue smoke with expressions of ecstatic relief. Their joyful cries as they finally cease to exist might be the most unsettling aspect of all. The Meeseeks episode stands out as one of Rick and Morty's most effective explorations of purpose and pain. These creatures aren't just bizarre for visual effect or shock value, they represent a philosophical thought experiment about existence itself. What happens when your entire being is defined by a single purpose? What if that purpose is denied to you? The Meeseeks embody a particularly disturbing form of cosmic horror, the horror of being trapped in an existence you never asked for, with no way out, except through fulfilling your programmed purpose. From a storytelling perspective, the Meeseeks represent how Rick and Morty can transform even the most conventional setups into something profoundly unsettling. The episode begins with the classic sitcom premise of a family arguing over chores. Who will help Summer get popular at school? Who will help Beth become a more complete woman? But quickly escalates into an exploration of purpose, pain, and the ethics of creating sentient beings with programmed limitations. The Meeseeks are simultaneously hilarious and horrifying, embodying the show's unique ability to make us laugh while contemplating the darker aspects of existence. Rick's casual attitude toward the Meeseeks' suffering reveals yet another dimension of his complex character. He created beings designed to experience existence as pain, programmed them to desperately crave non-existence, and then unleash them on his family without adequate warning about their limitations. The Meeseeks box joins Rick's growing collection of morally questionable inventions, but with an added layer of discomfort. Unlike the microverse battery inhabitants who at least enjoy their lives in ignorance, the Meeseeks are fully aware of their tortured purpose from the moment they're summoned. If the Meeseeks box challenged our understanding of Rick's ethics, his relationship with Unity elevates his moral ambiguity to an entirely planetary scale. While most people's exes might take a small town by storm, Rick's former flame literally takes over an entire civilization. When Rick introduces Morty and Summer to Unity, we're confronted with perhaps the most bizarre romance in television history. A genius scientist dating a collective hive mind, controlling millions of bodies simultaneously. The concept of unity is disturbing enough on its own. A single consciousness that spreads like a virus, assimilating individuals into a collective through physical contact. But the true bizarreness emerges when we witness what happens when this entity falls for Rick Sanchez. Their reunion begins innocently enough, with Unity greeting them through multiple assimilated beings speaking in perfect unison. However, the situation quickly spirals as we realize the astronomical power imbalance at play. Rick's desires immediately reshape the lives of millions. What makes this relationship particularly unsettling is how it transforms an entire civilization into props for Rick's personal gratification. When Rick expresses a passing desire, we watch as Unity redirects thousands of bodies to fulfill his whims. Cities become playthings, reorganized for parties, while individual bodies become disposable vessels for Rick's entertainment. The casual way Rick requests outlandish scenarios, like asking to watch a stadium of redheads engage with a stadium of individuals with specific physical characteristics, demonstrates how completely Unity's planetary population has been reduced to objects for his amusement. The disturbing nature of Rick and Unity's dynamic extends beyond the spectacle of mass control. Their relationship functions as a perfect metaphor for addiction and codependency, with Rick's influence corrupting Unity's carefully maintained civilization. As their reunion intensifies, Unity begins neglecting its governmental responsibilities, letting previously organized systems fall into chaos. What begins as an efficient planetary administration deteriorates into a hedonistic playground as Rick's destructive tendencies spread through Unity's collective consciousness. Unity's letter to Rick at the episode's conclusion reveals the true nature of their relationship. "I can't be with you. I lose who I am and become part of you." This confession exposes how Rick's personality overwhelms even a being capable of controlling millions, highlighting the tremendous gravitational pull of his chaotic influence. The hive mind concept becomes the perfect vehicle to explore how toxic relationships can completely subsume one partner's identity. Only here, that subsumption affects an entire world. The power dynamic between Rick and Unity creates a relationship with disturbing implications that extend far beyond conventional romantic entanglements. While Unity governs millions, Rick somehow manages to exert control over this immensely powerful entity. As the episode progresses, we witness Unity engaging in increasingly self-destructive behaviors under Rick's influence, drinking excessively, experimenting with recreational substances, and neglecting its responsibilities. The relationship portrays addiction playing out across a macrocosmic scale, with an entire civilization dragged along for the destructive ride. What's particularly disturbing about this dynamic is how it reveals the extent of Rick's selfishness. He shows no concern for the individuals within Unity's collective, treating them as extensions of his lover rather than autonomous beings forced to participate in his relationship. When Summer expresses concern about the ethics of assimilation, pointing out that Unity has effectively enslaved a planet, Rick dismissively defends the hive mind. His willingness to overlook planetary-scale mind control reveals just how far his moral compass has drifted, prioritizing his desires over the autonomy of millions. The episode reaches its emotional crescendo when Unity abandons Rick, leaving behind a planet of unconscious bodies and a painfully honest breakup letter. Rick returns to an empty world that just hours earlier had been reconfigured to satisfy his every desire. This rejection triggers one of the darkest moments in the series, as Rick returns to his garage, concocts a lethal device, and nearly takes his own life. The sequence plays out in devastating silence, showing how beneath Rick's cavalier exterior lies profound pain that he cannot process in healthy ways. This suicide attempt sequence stands as one of the show's most emotionally resonant moments, underscoring how even Rick's unconventional relationships leave deep emotional scars. For all his interdimensional adventures and scientific achievements, Rick remains fundamentally incapable of maintaining healthy connections. His relationship with Unity exposes his profound loneliness. The fact that the only being who could truly accept him was one capable of being millions of people simultaneously speaks volumes about his isolation. The Unity episode accomplishes something remarkable within adult animation by using science fiction body horror to examine deeply human experiences of love, addiction, and codependency. The concept of a hive mind becomes the perfect vehicle to explore relationship dynamics that might otherwise be too subtle to dramatize effectively. By externalizing the internal experience of losing oneself in a relationship, the episode creates a visceral representation of codependency that's both intellectually and emotionally affecting. What makes this storyline particularly effective is how it balances its high-concept premise with genuine emotional stakes. Despite the bizarreness of dating an entire planet, Rick's pain feels authentic and universal. The episode suggests that even in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, emotional connections remain profoundly important, and their failure devastating, regardless of how unconventional those connections might be. Rick's scientific genius offers no protection from heartbreak, perhaps even amplifying his suffering due to his awareness of infinite realities where things might have worked out differently. The relationship between Rick and Unity serves as a perfect demonstration of how Rick and Morty uses science fiction concepts to explore deeply human experiences. The hive mind premise allows the show to literalize abstract relationship dynamics. When Unity says Rick makes her lose herself, we've literally watched it happen across an entire civilization. This concrete representation of abstract emotional states creates a uniquely powerful storytelling approach that distinguishes the series from other adult animation. The Unity episode's success lies in its seamless blend of high-concept science fiction with authentic emotional resonance. While the premise is outlandish, the underlying themes of addiction, codependency, and toxic relationships feel painfully real. By the episode's conclusion, we've witnessed not just a bizarre romance between a man and a planet, but a devastating portrait of how relationships can simultaneously fulfill and destroy us, sometimes on a planetary scale. If relationships can destroy worlds on an emotional level, Rick Potion number 9 shows us they can literally destroy planets on a physical level. What begins as Morty's innocent request for help with a high school crush transforms into perhaps the most consequential mistake in the entire series, one that Rick doesn't even attempt to truly fix. Instead, he does something far more disturbing. He finds a reality where the catastrophe never happened, but where he and Morty conveniently die, allowing them to simply replace their dead counterparts and continue as if nothing ever happened. The episode starts innocuously enough with Morty pining for his classmate Jessica during a flu epidemic at school. He asks Rick for a love potion, something that seems like a harmless teenage request. Rick quickly concocts a solution using powerful oxytocin-based chemicals mixed with vole DNA. Voles being creatures that mate for life. The potion works as intended at first, with Jessica becoming instantly infatuated with Morty at the school dance. But this is Rick and Morty, and nothing ever stays simple for long. The true horror begins when the chemicals interact with the influenza virus going around the school. The contaminated love potion spreads through the air like a biological weapon, causing everyone who catches it to become obsessively attracted to Morty. What starts as a seemingly advantageous turn of events, suddenly everyone wants Morty, quickly spirals into a nightmare as the entire town begins hunting him down with single-minded, primal desire. Rick's first attempt to fix the situation creates an even bigger catastrophe. His antidote reacts with the already mutated flu virus, transforming everyone into what Rick refers to as Cronenbergs, grotesque, body horror monstrosities with misshapen limbs, multiple orifices, and exposed organs. The name itself is a reference to filmmaker David Cronenberg, famous for his disturbing body transformation horror films. The visual impact of seeing familiar characters twisted into these biological nightmares is genuinely unsettling, especially as they retain just enough of their human characteristics to be recognizable. What makes this moment truly bizarre isn't just the body horror, though that's certainly shocking. It's Rick's escalating series of failed solutions. Each attempt to reverse the damage only creates new, more horrifying mutations. The entire population transforms through several stages of monstrosity, each more disturbing than the last. The ripple effect accelerates exponentially until Rick finally admits something we rarely hear from him, that he can't fix it. But rather than face the consequences of their actions, Rick reveals what becomes one of the most morally disturbing aspects of the show's universe. He simply locates a reality where he successfully solved the Cronenberg problem, but where both he and Morty died immediately afterward in a lab accident. This convenient timeline allows them to step into their dead counterparts' lives without disrupting the family dynamic. The casualness with which Rick approaches this solution is chilling. "There's an infinite number of realities, Morty," he explains. And in a few dozen of those, I fixed the problem. We just happened to be in one where we both died. There's no grand effort to restore their original world or save their family. There's just convenient replacement and moving on. The moral implications are staggering. Their original Beth, Jerry, and Summer are left behind to fend for themselves in a world of monsters, while Rick and Morty simply slot into a nearly identical reality. This moment establishes one of the show's most important philosophical premises: the disposability of entire universes in Rick's worldview. With infinite realities to choose from, no single timeline matters that much to him. It's a perspective that fundamentally changes how we understand consequences in the show. Mistakes aren't fixed or overcome through growth. They're simply abandoned for a more convenient alternative. The psychological impact on Morty is immediate and profound. We witness his horror as he helps bury his own corpse in the backyard. The camera lingers on his 1,000-yard stare as he processes what they've done and what it means. This is a defining character moment for Morty, the realization that in Rick's world, nothing is permanent, not even reality itself. It fundamentally changes his understanding of his place in the multiverse. What's even more disturbing is that the abandoned Cronenberg world doesn't simply cease to exist once Rick and Morty leave it behind. It continues, with the mutated population adapting to their new biology and the abandoned Beth, Jerry, and Summer forced to survive in this post-apocalyptic nightmare. The show later revisits this reality, confirming that the consequences of their actions persist long after they've washed their hands of responsibility. This abandoned reality becomes one of the most significant ripple effects in the entire series. It stands as a monument to Rick's casual disregard for consequences and establishes a pattern that will repeat throughout the show. When things get too difficult or messy, there's always another reality to escape to. It establishes dimensional abandonment as a core theme, one that will haunt Morty's character development moving forward. The episode subverts the typical narrative trope of a reset button seen in so many science fiction stories, where no matter how catastrophic the events, everything returns to normal by the end. In Rick Potion number 9, the catastrophe is permanent. The original world remains destroyed. The only reset happens through dimensional replacement, a solution that carries its own psychological weight. What makes Rick Potion number 9 such a pivotal episode is how it reveals the true nature of consequences in the Rick and Morty universe. In most stories, characters face the results of their actions and either overcome them or are defeated by them. Here, Rick introduces a third option: simply leaving the consequences behind and finding a reality where they never happened. This moral flexibility becomes a defining characteristic of the show moving forward. The final scenes of Rick and Morty adjusting to their new reality are played with disturbing casualness. Rick immediately returns to his workshop while Morty sits in front of the TV, shell-shocked by what they've done. It's a quiet moment that speaks volumes about both characters: Rick's ability to compartmentalize and move on, versus Morty's growing awareness of the moral weight of their adventures. This pattern of dimensional abandonment fundamentally changes how we view every subsequent adventure. With the precedent established that Rick can always find another reality if things go wrong, the stakes shift from physical danger to psychological consequence. The true risk isn't death or failure. It's the cumulative trauma of knowing how disposable each reality truly is. The trauma of reality replacement finds an unexpected outlet when Rick introduces the family to something far more casual yet equally mind-bending: television from infinite dimensions. Unlike the high-stakes universe-hopping of previous adventures, interdimensional cable transforms the bizarre into background noise, revealing how quickly humans can adapt to the unthinkable when it's packaged as entertainment. When Rick casually modifies the Smith family television, he's not just changing channels. He's normalizing the impossible through the most ordinary activity imaginable. What makes the interdimensional cable concept so fascinating is how it combines the mundane act of channel surfing with the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. Rick doesn't present this technological marvel with any grandeur. Instead, he treats it like he's simply upgrading their cable package, albeit one that can tune into literally any show from any reality. The family gathers around the couch like it's a normal movie night, except they're about to witness realities where a serial mascot stands trial for murder and commercials feature salesmen whose medical condition prevents them from feeling or seeing anything. The genius of these episodes lies in their improvisational nature. Many of the segments we see were created through actual improvisation by the voice actors, particularly Justin Roiland, who voiced both Rick and Morty at the time. This unscripted approach creates a raw, unfiltered strangeness that perfectly captures the random chaos of infinite realities. The stammering, incomplete sentences and bizarre tangents don't feel like carefully crafted jokes, but rather genuine glimpses into worlds that make no logical sense yet somehow exist. This approach allows for moments of pure spontaneity that conventional scripting could never achieve. We see the family reacting to these channels in ways that reveal deeper aspects of their personalities. Jerry gravitates toward the most simplistic programming, finding comfort in shows that require minimal intellectual engagement. Beth searches for versions of herself that made different life choices, revealing her lingering regrets. Summer alternates between disinterest and fascination, while Morty often seems disturbed by the implications of what they're watching. Rick, however, remains completely unfazed by even the most disturbing content, suggesting his prolonged exposure to infinite realities has desensitized him to the bizarre. The segments themselves range from absurd to genuinely unsettling. We witness Two Brothers, a movie trailer about siblings facing increasingly ridiculous threats, including Mexican Armada with weapons made from tomatoes, and A Strong Bond, that keeps getting derailed by the narrator breaking into laughter. There's Ants in My Eyes Johnson, a commercial featuring a man with a medical condition that leaves him unable to feel or see anything, cheerfully advertising his electronics store while it's being robbed and catching fire around him. Each segment presents a reality with its own internal logic that makes sense only within that specific dimension. What's particularly interesting about these episodes is how they serve as a meta-commentary on television itself. The format satirizes various genres and tropes while simultaneously embracing the medium's potential for creativity and absurdity. We see parodies of game shows, commercials, action movies, and sitcoms, each twisted in ways that highlight the absurdity of our own television conventions. The show uses this format to critique our passive consumption of media, while also reveling in the creative freedom it provides. The interdimensional cable concept proved so popular with fans that it returned in a sequel episode, introducing even more disturbing concepts. We meet a man obsessed with personal space who literally peels off his own skin to get away from himself. We witness How They Do It, Plumbuses, a manufacturing documentary about an object whose purpose is never explained but is apparently common enough to warrant its own How It's Made segment. Perhaps most memorably, we meet a character who proudly eats his own waste on a talk show, treating this bizarre behavior as if it were a perfectly normal lifestyle choice worthy of celebration. These episodes connect thematically to the show's ongoing exploration of identity and possibility. When the family sees alternate versions of themselves in commercials and shows, it forces them to confront roads not taken and lives they could have lived. In one powerful moment, Jerry and Beth watch a reality where she became a successful surgeon and he became a famous actor, prompting them to question their actual life choices. These glimpses into alternate possibilities serve as uncomfortable reminders that identity isn't fixed. It's shaped by countless small decisions that could have gone differently. The seemingly random TV segments also connect to deeper questions about meaning in a multiverse. If every possible reality exists somewhere, then everything from the profound to the absurd is happening simultaneously across infinite dimensions. This concept both elevates the mundane, somewhere the most ridiculous thing imaginable is someone's normal, and diminishes the significant, even the most meaningful achievement is just one possibility among endless alternatives. It's a paradox that Rick seems to understand fully, contributing to his nihilistic worldview. What's most revealing about Rick's character in these episodes is his casual acceptance of infinite possibilities. While the rest of the family reacts with shock, confusion, or disgust to what they're seeing, Rick watches with mild amusement or indifference. His exposure to countless realities has normalized the bizarre to such an extent that nothing surprises him anymore. This casualness highlights a key aspect of Rick's psychology. He's become so accustomed to the infinite that he's lost the ability to be truly amazed or disturbed, contributing to his emotional detachment and nihilism. The overwhelming popularity of these episodes with fans reveals something interesting about audience psychology as well. The segments generated instantly quotable moments that became widely shared among viewers, creating a shared language of references. Fans often cite "real fake doors" or "ants in my eyes Johnson" as favorite moments, suggesting that even as viewers, we're drawn to the strange and unexpected. There's something liberating about watching content that breaks from conventional narrative structures and embraces pure absurdity. In a particularly brilliant stroke, the show occasionally reminds us that these aren't just funny sketches, but actual windows into functioning realities. The characters can technically visit any of these dimensions if they wanted to, making the broadcast a form of dimensional tourism from the safety of their couch. This blurring of entertainment and reality creates an interesting parallel to our own media consumption, where we often watch shows about places and situations we'll never personally experience. The legacy of interdimensional cable extends beyond the episodes themselves. The concept established a template for the show's anthology episodes, where conventional narrative gives way to a series of loosely connected vignettes. Later seasons would offer variations on this format with Morty's Mind Blowers and Never Rick and Morty, each finding new ways to explore the multiverse through fragmented storytelling. These anthology episodes have become a staple of the series, offering creative freedom while still exploring the show's central themes. From anthology episodes showing random dimensions, the show takes an even more bizarre turn by asking, what if infinite versions of the smartest man in the universe created their own society? The Citadel of Ricks started as a throwaway concept, but evolved into something far more disturbing. A place where thousands of supposedly unique Ricks immediately established hierarchies, class systems, and began oppressing versions of their own grandson. First introduced in close Rick counters of the Rick kind, the Citadel presents perhaps the most fascinating contradiction in the entire series. Here we have Rick Sanchez, a character who consistently rejects authority, government, and conformity. Yet when gathered together in sufficient numbers, Ricks immediately create the very systems they claim to despise. What begins as a glimpse of a council quickly expands into an entire civilization with its own bizarre infrastructure, all populated exclusively by variations of just two people. The Citadel's economy functions entirely on the commodification of the Rick and Morty relationship. We see Mortys being manufactured and traded like commodities, assigned to Ricks as if they were equipment rather than people. The social stratification becomes immediately apparent. Some Ricks enjoy positions of power and privilege, while others work menial jobs in factories. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Mortys exist in a perpetual underclass, subjected to discrimination and exploitation by the very people who are, in essence, their grandfathers. This society represents a bizarre social experiment that the show uses to examine human nature. If you took the most anti-establishment character in animation and multiplied him infinitely, would his rebellious nature prevent social hierarchies from forming? The answer is a resounding no. The Citadel reveals that even Rick's supposedly unique personality, when replicated across a population, naturally forms the same oppressive structures he rails against. It's a commentary on how quickly individualists become conformists when given the opportunity to be in charge. The institutional frameworks within the Citadel provide some of the most disturbing world-building in the series. Morty schools exist to educate and indoctrinate young Mortys, teaching them their place in society and how to properly serve their Ricks. These schools don't encourage critical thinking or self-determination. They exist purely to maintain the social order. Meanwhile, Rick factories process and assign Ricks to various functions within society, creating a caste system among supposedly identical geniuses. The economic exploitation becomes even more apparent in the Ricklantis mix-up, where we witness the factory floors, the political campaigns, and the day-to-day struggles of countless Ricks and Mortys. The city operates with a disturbing efficiency, processing both Ricks and Mortys through systems designed to maintain the status quo. Simple Rick's Wafer Factory represents perhaps the most disturbing example of this exploitation. A facility where a Rick is kept in a permanent state of blissful memory, his brain chemicals harvested to flavor wafers that other Ricks consume for a momentary taste of happiness. What's particularly fascinating about the Citadel is how it manages to create diversity within uniformity. Despite being composed of just two basic templates, the society contains a remarkable variety of personalities and types. We see cop Ricks, worker Ricks, politician Ricks, each maintaining the core characteristics of Rick while expressing them through different social roles. The same applies to Mortys, who range from compliant and subservient to rebellious and independent. This diversity within sameness creates a microcosm that reflects our own society's tensions between individuality and conformity. The evil Morty storyline represents one of the most significant ripple effects in the entire series. Beginning in Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind and continuing through the Ricklantis mix-up, we witness a Morty who has broken free from the predetermined role society assigned him. His rise to power fundamentally transforms the Citadel, culminating in the assassination of the Council of Ricks and the establishment of a new order. This storyline explores themes of rebellion, institutional power, and the desire for freedom from oppressive systems. Evil Morty's campaign and eventual victory showcase the inherent contradictions within the Citadel. He rises to power by appealing to the disenfranchised, promising equality between Ricks and Mortys, only to secretly eliminate those who might oppose him once in office. His character arc reflects how revolution often contains the seeds of the very tyranny it sought to overthrow. The Citadel, designed by Ricks to protect themselves from threats, ultimately produces its own greatest threat from within: a Morty who learned to think like a Rick. The complex social dynamics of the Citadel allow the show to explore identity in ways that would be impossible in other settings. When everyone is essentially the same person, what creates difference? The answer lies in circumstance, choice, and position within social hierarchies. Some Ricks embrace their privilege while others resent their low status. Some Mortys accept their subservient role while others rage against it. These variations illustrate how environment and opportunity shape identity, perhaps more than inherent personality traits. The Citadel episodes provide some of the most thought-provoking world-building in the series, asking viewers to consider how institutions shape individuals and how power corrupts even those who claim to despise it. The entire concept evolved from what could have been a simple one-off joke about multiple Ricks forming a council. Instead, it grew into one of the show's most important locations, generating storylines that continue to impact the main narrative arc. This elaborate society serves as a dark mirror, reflecting the show's central relationship. By multiplying Rick and Morty across an entire civilization, the show isolates and examines the power dynamics between them. The exploitation, manipulation, and occasional genuine connection between various Ricks and Mortys highlight the complexities of the main character's relationship. It forces viewers to question whether our Rick's treatment of his Morty is actually any better than what we see in the Citadel. Perhaps most disturbing is how the Citadel episodes reveal darker aspects of the main characters by showing their traits multiplied across a population. Rick's worst qualities, his arrogance, selfishness, and dismissal of others' autonomy, become institutionalized when Ricks gather in sufficient numbers. Similarly, Morty's tendency toward submission, his desire for approval, and his occasional bursts of rebellion become defining characteristics of the Morty underclass. By displaying these traits across a society, the show forces us to confront the problematic aspects of our protagonists. The Citadel's ongoing evolution throughout the series demonstrates how a seemingly minor concept can grow into something with massive narrative implications. What began as a group of Ricks finding safety in numbers transformed into one of the most complex societies in animated television. This evolution mirrors the show's own growth from a relatively simple sci-fi comedy into a multi-layered examination of existentialism, identity, and power. While the Citadel explores what happens when countless Ricks populate one society, Never Ricking Morty asks an even more disorienting question. What happens when characters discover they're trapped inside the mechanics of storytelling itself? What starts as a simple toy train purchase quickly derails into perhaps the most structurally ambitious episode in animation history. One where reality, fiction, and meta-commentary collide until neither the characters nor the audience can determine where the actual story begins or ends. When Rick and Morty board what appears to be an ordinary train, they soon realize they're not on a conventional journey. Instead, they've entered a narrative-generating device called the Story Train, designed specifically to create infinite story possibilities. The brilliance of this setup is how it immediately places our protagonists in direct conflict with the very medium they exist within. They're not just fighting an enemy, they're fighting against the constraints of narrative structure itself. The Story Train isn't simply a location, it's a physical manifestation of storytelling machinery that forces Rick and Morty to confront their existence as characters. As they move through the train cars, the bizarre ripple effects multiply exponentially. Each new section introduces increasingly self-referential scenarios that blur the line between what's happening within the show's reality and what's merely a story within a story. The episode deliberately disorients viewers through a series of false endings and narrative fake-outs. Just when you think you understand what's happening, the rug gets pulled out again, revealing another layer of fiction. This creates what critics have called a Russian nesting doll effect, where stories contain stories that contain yet more stories. What makes this episode particularly fascinating is how many of these sequences were improvised by the voice actors. This unscripted approach contributes to the episode's unique sense of unfiltered strangeness, creating moments that feel genuinely unpredictable and spontaneous. The improvisation itself becomes a meta-commentary on the creative process behind the show, bringing another layer of reality-bending complexity to an already mind-warping concept. The Story Train functions as both loving parody and brutal critique of the show itself. Each car seems to mock different aspects of Rick and Morty's narrative tendencies, from the anthology episodes showing alternate realities to the more serialized character development arcs. The episode essentially creates a funhouse mirror that reflects the show's own storytelling techniques back at itself, questioning whether these familiar patterns have become too predictable or formulaic. It's the television equivalent of a novel that suddenly starts analyzing its own prose style mid-chapter. One particularly brilliant moment involves Rick encountering a literal representation of the show's writers, forcing him to confront the people who control his existence. This scene breaks the fourth wall so thoroughly that it essentially demolishes it, rebuilds it, then questions whether walls should exist at all. The boundaries between fiction and reality within. The show continued to blur until even Rick and Morty themselves seem genuinely confused about what's actually happening to them. When characters who routinely visit infinite dimensions and alternate realities can't determine what's real, the audience is left completely unmoored. The episode also serves as a commentary on audience expectations and fan theories. By repeatedly setting up anticipated narrative payoffs only to reveal them as manufactured stories, Never Rick and Morty challenges viewers to examine their relationship with the show. Are they watching for plot advancement, character development, or simply to see what bizarre concept comes next? The structure train becomes a vehicle not just for the characters, but for the show to directly interrogate why and how we consume stories. Even more fascinating is how the episode's seemingly random TV segments connect thematically to deeper questions about identity and possibility. What initially appears as a collection of disconnected vignettes gradually reveals itself as an examination of how stories shape our understanding of ourselves. The family's reactions to glimpses of alternate versions of themselves highlight the show's self-awareness about its own themes of identity and choice. As the episode progresses, the layers of meta-narrative become so complex that they transform into a form of cosmic horror. Rick, the smartest man in the universe, finds himself genuinely trapped within the machinery of storytelling itself. For a character defined by his ability to control any situation, this represents perhaps the ultimate existential threat, being unable to determine where fiction ends and reality begins. It's less about escaping a physical train and more about escaping the predetermined patterns of narrative itself. What makes Never Rick and Morty stand out even among the show's bizarre episodes is how it simultaneously mocks and celebrates Rick and Morty's own narrative tendencies while questioning the relationship between creators, characters, and audience. The Story Train doesn't just break the fourth wall. It questions whether walls should exist at all in storytelling. It's a bizarre mirror that reflects back not just the show's techniques but also our own expectations as viewers. The episode ultimately suggests something profoundly disturbing, that perhaps all stories, no matter how seemingly random or chaotic, eventually fall into recognizable patterns. Even a show built on unpredictability and infinite possibilities might ultimately be constrained by the fundamental structures of storytelling. This realization transforms what began as a simple toy train purchase into one of animation's most ambitious experiments in meta-narrative. By the conclusion, we're left uncertain about what actually happened versus what was simply part of the story train's narrative generation. This deliberate ambiguity forces viewers to question everything they've seen, not just in this episode, but potentially in the entire series. If Rick and Morty can be trapped in a narrative device, how can we be sure any of their adventures are real within the show's universe? The episode doesn't just break the fourth wall. It obliterates the concept of walls entirely. Imagine having the power to erase any mistake you make with the press of a button. Sounds incredible, right? In the Vat of Acid episode, this seemingly perfect ability transforms from Morty's greatest fantasy into his worst nightmare, as we witness how the absence of consequences doesn't free us from responsibility. It multiplies it across infinite realities. What begins as a completely trivial argument between Rick and Morty sets the stage for one of the most psychologically devastating experiments in the series. After Morty criticizes Rick's escape plan involving a fake vat of acid during a crystal deal gone wrong, Rick's ego can't handle the criticism. Rather than simply accepting that maybe, just maybe, pretending to dissolve an acid isn't the most sophisticated plan, Rick decides to teach Morty a lesson about respecting his genius through an elaborate revenge scheme. The save point device Rick creates appears to be the ultimate wish fulfillment, a remote that allows Morty to mark a point in time and return to it whenever he wants, effectively erasing any mistakes or awkward situations. It's exactly what a teenager would dream of, the power to undo any embarrassing moment or risky decision. The way Rick presents it seems almost benevolent, as if he's giving Morty this incredible gift. But of course, this is Rick we're talking about, and nothing is ever that simple. What follows is a progressively disturbing montage as Morty begins testing the limits of his new power. At first, it's innocent enough, talking to his crush without fear of rejection. But quickly, Morty's behavior escalates. We see him stealing, causing property damage, and even endangering lives, all with the casual press of a button to reset whenever things go wrong. Each reset emboldens him further, removing the natural feedback loop that helps develop our moral compass. The episode brilliantly illustrates how consequences aren't just punishments, they're essential teachers. This sequence is particularly clever in how it structures Morty's descent. Each reset builds upon the last, showing how the absence of accountability can corrupt even the most well-meaning person. Morty isn't inherently bad, but the power to escape consequences transforms him into someone increasingly reckless and self-centered. The montage serves as a disturbing mirror to how we might all behave if suddenly freed from the restraints of social and moral consequences. The real emotional punch comes when Morty's life takes an unexpected turn. In the midst of his consequence-free experimentation, he accidentally meets a girl and falls genuinely in love. Their relationship develops beautifully over months, a rare moment of authentic connection in Morty's chaotic life. They share adventures, inside jokes, and even survive a plane crash together, stranded in the wilderness where they depend on each other for survival. It's perhaps the most meaningful relationship we've seen Morty experience. And then, in a moment of carelessness, Morty accidentally hits the reset button. Months of shared experiences, love, and growth, erased in an instant. The look of devastation on Morty's face is palpable as he realizes what he's lost. It's in this moment that the device transforms from a tool of freedom into an instrument of profound loss. 4. The first time, Morty experiences the true cost of his reset button. Not just avoiding bad outcomes, but erasing good ones too. This emotional gut punch sets up the episode's devastating reveal. When Morty finally confronts Rick about the pain he's experiencing, Rick unveils the horrifying truth. The device never actually reset time at all. Instead, Each press of the button transported Morty to an alternate reality where he hadn't yet made whatever mistake he was trying to erase, while simultaneously releasing deadly neutrino bombs in the reality he was leaving behind. Every reset created a timeline where Morty abandoned his actions to their consequences, including all the horrible things he did during his consequence-free spree. The psychological horror of this revelation is staggering. Every reset didn't erase Morty's mistakes. It created entire universes where those mistakes continued to exist and affect others. The girl he fell in love with still exists in one of those abandoned timelines, wondering why Morty suddenly disappeared forever. Every petty crime, every reckless act, every person he hurt, all still happening in realities he simply left behind. Rick's revenge plan goes beyond mere pettiness. It's existential torture disguised as a gift. To cement his victory, Rick forces Morty to live through one final humiliation, jumping into a vat of fake acid to escape the angry parents of a boy Morty had been bullying. The very solution Morty had mocked at the beginning becomes his only escape, completing Rick's elaborate circle of revenge. What makes the Vat of Acid episode truly brilliant is how it transforms from a simple disagreement to a profound meditation on responsibility and choice. It uses science fiction to literalize an abstract philosophical concept that our choices, even the ones we regret or wish to take back, continue to exist in the world through their effects on others. The episode earned its Emmy not just for its clever plot, but for how it uses that plot to explore something fundamentally human. The montage structure serves the thematic weight perfectly, allowing us to witness the gradual corruption that occurs when actions are divorced from consequences. Each press of the button represents another ethical line crossed, another moral boundary eroded. By the time Morty realizes the truth, we've witnessed the complete arc of what happens when we try to escape the weight of our own choices. This episode also offers a dark mirror to other instances in the series where Rick and Morty have abandoned timelines. While previous episodes like Rick Potion No. 9 showed them leaving behind destroyed realities, the Vat of Acid episode forces Morty to confront the full psychological weight of what that abandonment means. It's not just about leaving. It's about the continuing existence of those left behind. In its final moments, the episode brings us full circle to that initial petty argument about a fake vat of acid. What began as a disagreement about an escape plan becomes a devastating lesson about the inescapability of our choices. Rick's pettiness creates ripples that extend far beyond what either character could have imagined, affecting countless lives across multiple dimensions. All because his ego couldn't handle a teenager questioning his ingenuity. What truly sets Rick and Morty apart from other animated series is its commitment to consequences. Unlike shows that hit the reset button at the end of each episode, Rick and Morty embraces the lasting impact of its bizarre scenarios. The characters actually change and develop as a result of their experiences, carrying emotional and sometimes physical scars from previous adventures. This ripple effect of actions and consequences creates a richer narrative tapestry, allowing for more complex character growth and storytelling possibilities. As you drift off to sleep tonight, consider how your own small decisions might create unexpected ripples in your life, hopefully less catastrophic than those in the multiverse.